The wind that scoured the surface of Urin Hollow did not howl so much as it hissed. It was a thin, predatory sound, the noise of air being forced through the jagged leaves of the crystalline crops that covered the valley floor. These were not plants in the way a softer world might understand them. They were translucent, silica-based growths that chimed softly when the dawn breeze caught them, shimmering with a pale, hungry violet light. Above them, the sky was a bruised purple, transitioning slowly to the harsh, bleaching white of the coming day. But the dawn was not the dominant light source in Urin Hollow. That honor belonged to the debt hologram. It hovered over the village square, a massive cylindrical projection anchored by a rusted emitter tower that rose 300 feet into the air. The hologram was a constant rotating cylinder of blood-red text, visible for miles. It listed the village's output, its interest rates, and the terrifying, ever-increasing sum of its default. The words negative balance dominated the sky, casting a crimson pallor over the mud-brick huts and the corrugated metal roofing of the market stalls. Even the rusted agricultural drones buzzing lazily overhead like fat, metallic flies seemed to dip under the weight of those red numbers. The drones were poorly maintained, their sensor eyes cloudy, leaking hydraulic fluid that fell like black rain onto the thirsty earth. The village was waking up, but it was a waking of exhaustion, not hope. People moved with the slow conservation of energy gait common to those who know that calories are expensive and water is scarce. They ignored the red sky. They had to. If they looked up too long, the sheer mathematics of their slavery would crush them before the suns even reached their zenith. But memory was a different kind of ghost, one that did not vanish with the sunrise. For Lyra, the memory was not a ghost. It was a physical wound that refused to close. The flashback hit the narrative stream with the force of a physical blow, rewinding the clock to a night months ago, when the air had been cooler and the red light of the debt tower had seemed, for a brief, foolish moment, irrelevant. The room had been small, smelling of dried herbs and sterilized water. Lyra lay on a cot, her body arched in the final straining moments of labor. She was beautiful in a way that defied the grim surroundings. Her skin was a pale, shifting slate blue, but it was the markings that drew the eye. Intricate, bioluminescent veins traced patterns across her arms and throat, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic gold light that matched the beating of her heart. This was the mark of her biopsionic lineage, a rare bloodline that the galaxy had mostly forgotten, or hunted to extinction. Sweat plastered her silver hair to her forehead. Her hands gripped the rusted bed frame, bending the metal. "Push," the village midwife had urged, her voice rough with age and kindness. And Lyra had pushed, pouring every ounce of her life force into the act. The golden light in her skin flared blindingly bright, illuminating the cracked walls of the hut, turning the dust motes into floating stars. A cry pierced the air, high, strong, and undeniably alive. The baby girl was placed on Lyra's chest. The infant was slippery and warm, her skin a softer shade of blue, her own tiny markings glowing with a faint, steady pulse. Lyra's breath came in ragged gasps, but her face was transcendent. She ran a finger down the baby's cheek. The connection was instantaneous and terrifyingly deep. It was not just biology, it was a resonance. She could feel the baby's confusion, her sudden coldness, her instinctual need for warmth. "Sorry," Lyra whispered. She tasted the name. It felt like a shield. She looked down at the tiny, squirming life. "I promise you," Lyra murmured, her voice fierce and low. "I will never let anyone take you. You are mine. You are not a number. You are sorry." The peace lasted for 4 hours. It was shattered by the scream of engines, Not the rattle of the farm drones, but the high-pitched whine of high-performance thrusters. The hut shook, dust drifted down from the ceiling. Outside, the village square was bathed in the harsh white spotlights of an Imperial collection shuttle. It was a sleek, ugly thing, built like a flying hammer, heavy with armor and weaponry. The ramp descended with a hiss of hydraulics, and the debt collectors marched out. They wore matte black armor that absorbed the light, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. They did not carry weapons of war, but weapons of compliance, shock batons and neural pacifiers. Floating beside them were spherical databanks, humming with the relentless logic of the Imperial Treasury. Juro, the village elder, met them at the edge of the square. He was a human man, his skin turned into leather by 80 years of twin sun radiation. He bowed low, his hands trembling. "We have the harvest quota," Juro said, his voice cracking. "It is 90% pure." "We worked through the nights." The chief collector did not look at him. He looked at a holographic manifest projected from his wrist. He was a tall humanoid, his species indeterminate behind the armor, his voice modulated into a synthetic, flat monotone. "Interest rates were adjusted 6 standard hours ago," the collector said, "retroactive to the beginning of the quarter. Your payment is insufficient. You are in default." Juro fell to his knees. "Please, we have nothing else. The grain is all we have. Imperial Law Statute 790, the collector recited. In the event of total default, the creditor is authorized to seize living collateral to balance the ledger. Living collateral. The words hung in the dusty air, heavier than the heat. Lyra stumbled out of her hut, clutching Sari to her chest. She had heard the noise. She sensed the malice rolling off the armored figures like heat off a stone. The collector's helmet turned toward her. The sensors zoomed in. "Asset identified," the machine voice said. "Rare genetic marker. High market value." "No!" Lyra screamed. 2 enforcers moved with blurring speed. They were on her before she could run. Juro tried to stand, to intervene, but a backhanded blow from a gauntlet sent him sprawling into the dirt. Lyra fought. She was weakened from birth, but her blood was fire. She kicked out, her golden markings flaring hot enough to singe the fabric of her robe. She bit a gloved hand, tasting synthetic rubber. But they were too strong, and she was too exhausted. "Give me the child," the collector said. "Never!" Lyra shrieked, curling her body around the infant. The collector nodded to one of the enforcers. The soldier jammed a shock baton into Lyra's shoulder. Blue lightning arced through her body. Her nervous system seized. The scream died in her throat, replaced by a silent, agonizing convulsion. Her muscles locked, her arms springing open against her will. The enforcer scooped the baby from her paralyzed embrace. Sari began to wail, a thin, terrified sound that cut through the mechanical hum of the shuttle. Lyra lay in the dust, twitching, her eyes wide and fixed on the retreating figure. She tried to crawl, dragging her numb legs, her fingers clawing deep furrows into the hard earth. The chief collector tapped a sequence into the floating databank. A red laser scanned the baby's crying face, logging the DNA, the retinal pattern, the unique soul of the child into the Empire's cold mathematics. "Record this," the collector stated, his voice amplified so the whole cowering village could hear. The alien woman's baby was taken as payment for debts. The databank chirped. The transaction was complete. The debt total on the sky tower flickered, dropping by a fraction of a percent. Lyra's paralysis broke enough for her to find her voice. It was a broken animal sound. "Give her back." The ramp hissed closed. The engines roared, kicking up a storm of stinging sand. Lyra watched as the shuttle rose, becoming a star, then a speck, then nothing. The crying faded into the vast, indifferent silence of the atmosphere. She lay there until the suns came up, whispering the promise she had failed to keep, over and over, until her voice was gone and only the wind remained. Cut to the present. The heat of Urine Hollow at noon was not just a temperature, it was a physical assault. The twin suns, one large and yellow, the other small and angry white, hung directly overhead, bleaching the color out of the world. The shadows huddled directly beneath the objects that cast them, hiding from the glare. The village square was busy but quiet. Voices were kept low to conserve moisture. The red text of the debt tower was harder to see against the brightness of the day. But it was still there, a bloodstain on the eye, a transport shuttle, older and far more battered than the Imperial craft, descended from the upper atmosphere. It had no sleek lines. It was a brick with engines, its hull scarred by micrometeoroids and atmospheric re-entry burns. It landed with a heavy, grinding thud on the landing pad, venting steam that smelled of coolant and ozone. The ramp dropped with a metallic clang that made several villagers flinch. A boot hit the metal ramp, then another. Marcus Hale stepped out into the crushing light. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of something that didn't break easily, but had been chipped away at for a long time. He was tall, with the lean, corded muscle of someone who survived on adrenaline and bad rations. His face was a map of conflict, a thin white scar running through his left eyebrow, skin tanned and weathered by a dozen different suns. He wore a dusty long coat that had once been military issue but had been stripped of all insignia. He walked down the ramp, and there was a rhythm to his movement that was uneven. Step, whir click, step. His right leg was encased in a mechanical brace, an external exoskeleton of dull steel and hydraulic pistons. It compensated for a knee that had likely been shattered in a place far worse than this. Over one shoulder he slung a worn canvas duffel bag. In his right hand, gripped with casual familiarity, was a hard-shell rifle case, scuffed and dented. He stopped at the bottom of the ramp, squinting against the glare. He took a breath, tasting the air. It tasted of silica dust and despair. Perfect, he muttered to himself, his voice a dry rasp. Another glorious garden spot. He adjusted the strap of his bag and limped toward the market. He kept his head down, the brim of a faded cap pulled low. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't looking for a cause. He was looking for a drink, a bed, and the profound luxury of being left alone. The market was a collection of stalls huddled under ragged awnings. Marcus moved through the crowd, feeling the eyes on him. Strangers were rare in Urine Hollow. Strangers with military hardware and a limp that spoke of expensive violence were even rarer. He stopped at a stall selling water and protein cakes. The vendor, a lizard-skinned local with shifting, nervous eyes, watched him approach. "How much for a canteen fill and 2 cakes?" Marcus asked. 50 credits, the vendor said, testing the waters. Marcus didn't blink. He leaned against the stall, taking the weight off his bad leg. The brace hissed softly. "I look like I just fell off a turnip truck." "Friend?" Marcus asked. His tone was light, dry as the dust, but there was steel underneath it. 50 credits buys a bottle of vintage wine in the core systems. This is recycled moisture and algae paste. Inflation. The vendor shrugged. "The debt. You know." "I know debt," Marcus said. "And I know robbery. 10 credits. And you tell me where a man can sleep without getting sand in his teeth." The vendor looked at Marcus's face, really looked at it this time. He saw the eyes, gray, flat, and completely devoid of fear. He saw a man who had negotiated for his life more often than he had negotiated for lunch. 20 credits. the vendor countered, and the communal hall is past the elder's hut. Best roof in town. 15, Marcus said, tossing a coin onto the counter. It spun and settled in the dust. The vendor snatched it up. Deal. Marcus drank the water standing there, the cool liquid hitting his stomach like a blessing. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, scanning the square. He was trying to be invisible, to be just another piece of driftwood washing up on the shore. But the soldier in him never slept. He was clocking exits, lines of fire, threat levels. The threat level here was low. These people were beaten down. There was no fight left in them. Then, the sky glitched. It was a malfunction in the Det hologram tower's projector array. The massive red cylinder flickered, the code destabilizing. For a second, the image distorted, twisting into static. Then, the system rebooted, pulling a cached file from its memory banks to stabilize the projection stream. It pulled the last major transaction record. Suddenly, the silent red numbers were replaced by a three-dimensional replay, 50 feet high, accompanied by distorted, booming audio. Record this. The voice of the collector boomed across the square, echoing off the canyon walls. The alien woman's baby was taken as payment for debts. The market froze. Every head snapped up. Marcus looked up, frowning. He saw the holographic replay, the armored figure, the struggling woman, the tiny bundle being carried away. It was a loop of cruelty, broadcast in high definition. In the middle of the crowd, a woman froze. It was Lyra. She was thinner than she had been in the flashback, her face gaunt, her bioluminescent markings dimmed to a dull, sickly pulse. She was carrying a basket of tubers, but as the voice boomed overhead, the basket slipped from her fingers. The tubers rolled into the dirt. She stared up at the sky, at the ghost of her own worst moment. No, she whispered. The hologram cycled again, taken as payment for debts. Lyra's hands flew to her ears. She began to shake, a vibration that started in her boots and rattled her teeth. The trauma wasn't a memory. It was happening to her again, right now. The grief that she had been carrying like a stone in her chest suddenly became too heavy to bear. "Stop it!" she screamed. The sound tore out of her throat, raw and bleeding. "Stop it." She scrambled in the dirt, her fingers closing around a jagged rock the size of a fist. With a feral cry, she wound up and hurled it at the tower. It was a futile, heartbreaking gesture. The stone sailed through the air and fell hundreds of feet short of the emitter. But the force of the throw threw Lyra off balance. She spun, her feet tangling in the hem of her robe. She went down hard, hitting the packed earth with a sickening thud. She didn't get up. She curled into a ball, sobbing, beating her fists against the ground. Marcus moved before he thought. He didn't decide to help. His body simply reacted. It was the instinct of a man who had spent a lifetime pulling people out of the rubble. He dropped his duffel bag and surged forward, his brace whining in protest at the sudden acceleration. He pushed through the crowd of paralyzed onlookers. They were watching her with pity, but also with fear. Fear of the tower, fear of the emotion. Marcus reached her just as she tried to rise and stumbled again. He dropped to one knee, sliding his arm under her shoulders, catching her before she could hit the dirt a second time. "Easy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've got you." Lyra thrashed in his grip, blind with panic. She grabbed his collar, her fingers digging into the fabric of his coat. She looked up at him, but she didn't see him. Her violet eyes were wide, staring into a nightmare. "They took her," she gasped, her breath hitting Marcus's face in hot, sharp bursts. "They took my baby for numbers on a screen." As her skin touched his neck, something impossible happened. It wasn't a spark. It was a sledgehammer. Marcus felt a jolt slam through his skull, bypassing his sensory nerves and hitting the center of his brain. It was a wave of pure, distilled emotion, a grief so vast it felt like drowning in cold water, a rage so hot it tasted like copper. He saw flashes of images that weren't his, a tiny face, a glowing hand, the smell of sterile air and fear. He gasped, his head snapping back. The sensation was alien, slippery and electric. It brushed against the scar tissue of his own mind, finding the locked doors where he kept his own traumas and rattling the handles. He looked down at her, his eyes widening. He knew about psionics. He had fought them, killed them, seen them used as tools. But this felt different. This wasn't a weapon. It was a wound calling out to another wound. Lyra shuddered, the energy dissipating as she slumped against him, exhausted by the outburst. Marcus blinked, shaking the alien echo out of his head. He looked around. The villagers were staring. The hologram above finally corrected itself, returning to the silent, scrolling red numbers. He looked back at the woman in his arms. She was light, too light. Her face was streaked with dust and tears. He felt a sudden fierce spike of anger in his chest. It surprised him. He had thought he was done with anger. He had thought he had left all his righteous fury in a muddy trench 3 sectors away. But looking at this woman, broken by a machine in the sky, he felt the old wolf wake up. He clamped down on it. He couldn't afford to care. Caring got you killed. He shifted his grip, helping her steady herself. He cleared his throat, forcing his voice back to that dry, detached humor. "Well," he said, dusting off her shoulder with awkward gentleness. "I have had terrible first impressions before, but screaming at a telephone pole usually waits until the 3rd date." Lyra blinked, the fog of grief clearing just enough for her to register the man holding her. She saw the scar, the hard jaw, the eyes that looked as tired as she felt. She pulled back, confused by the joke, but stabilized by his physical solidity. She didn't laugh. She just stared at him, her chest heaving. The crowd began to murmur. A man stepped forward from the circle. It was Juro, the elder. He leaned on a gnarled staff, his eyes sharp despite his age. He had watched the stranger move. He had seen the reflex speed, the way he scanned the perimeter even while holding the woman. Juro saw a weapon that had been discarded. And Juro knew that sometimes discarded weapons were the only ones that still worked. "Thank you, traveler," Juro said, his voice carrying over the wind. "She is unwell. The heat takes us all sometimes." Marcus slowly released Lyra, making sure she could stand on her own. He picked up his bag and rifle case, the brace on his leg clicking loudly in the sudden silence. "Heat." Marcus agreed, his face carefully blank. "Just the heat." Juro stepped closer. "You have the look of a man who knows how to secure a perimeter, traveler. And that case, it does not hold a musical instrument." Marcus shifted his weight. "It holds spare parts." Juro nodded slowly. "We have had trouble with raiders, and as you can see, our morale is fragile. If you can offer us some advice on our defenses, I can offer you a bed in the communal hall and a hot meal. It is not much, but it is better than sleeping in the sand." Marcus looked at the elder. He looked at Lyra, who was now being supported by 2 other village women. She was still watching him, her gaze piercing, questioning. He should say no. He should get back on the shuttle and leave. "One night," Marcus said. "I leave at dawn. One night is all we ask." Juro said. The communal hall was a large, circular structure made of stone and reinforced with scavenged starship plating. That evening, a fire crackled in the central pit, burning dried stalks of the crystalline crops. The smoke smelled sweet and sharp. Marcus sat near the edge of the light, nursing a bowl of broth that tasted mostly of salt. He had spent the last hour walking the village perimeter with Juro, pointing out blind spots and suggesting firing lines. It was rote work, muscle memory. He watched the villagers. They ate in huddled groups, speaking in hushed tones. Lyra was not there. She had retreated to her hut. But her presence lingered. Marcus could still feel the phantom sensation of her grief on his skin, like a static charge that wouldn't ground out. He leaned back against a pillar, closing his eyes for a moment. He tried to summon the numbness that usually protected him. The gray fog he wrapped himself in. But it was thin tonight. Voices drifted over from the fire. Two old men and a woman were talking, their voices low, weaving a narrative out of the day's events. "It was exactly noon," the woman whispered. "Did you see the suns? They were aligned. Coincidence." One of the men grunted. "No," she insisted. The sky spoke. It showed the crime. And then he stepped out of the dust. A soldier. Broken soldier, the man argued. He walks with a machine. But he caught her. The woman said she fell and he caught her. The alien woman's baby was taken as payment for debts. We all know this. We have said it 1,000 times. But today the story changed. How? The woman paused, stirring the embers of the fire. The alien woman's baby was taken as payment for debts, she recited, her voice taking on the cadence of a legend being born. Until a veteran arrived in the village at noon. Marcus opened his eyes. He stared at the ceiling, listening to his own arrival being mythologized before his sweat had even dried. He shifted his leg, the metal brace digging into his flesh. They were looking for a hero. They were looking for a savior. They had found a burnout with a bad knee and a gun he had sworn never to use again. He took a sip of the salty broth. He would leave at dawn. He had to. Because if he stayed, if he let that story take root, he knew exactly how it would end. Stories like that ended in blood. But as the fire popped and the wind hissed outside, Marcus Hale didn't reach for his map to plan his departure. He reached for his rifle case, checking the latches just once to make sure they were secure. Outside, the red light of the debt tower pulsed against the night, a heartbeat of misery waiting to be stopped. The nightmare always began with the silence, in the dream. Marcus Hale was not standing in the dust of a backwater farming village. He was back in the Breaker Gorge on Orem 5. The air was not hot and dry. It was humid, smelling of wet rot and ionized ozone. The silence was the worst part because he knew what was coming. He knew that in exactly 3 seconds. The white-hot light of an orbital bombardment would turn the jungle into a sheet of glass. He tried to run. He always tried to run, but his legs were heavy, mired in mud that looked too much like blood. He looked down at his hands, and they were red. Not with his own blood, but with the blood of the things he had been ordered to break. Then came the sound. It was not a boom. It was a tear in the fabric of the world, a shriek that dissolved bone and melted fillings. The light washed over him, erasing his shadow, erasing his name, erasing everything but the guilt. Marcus woke up gasping, his body jerking upright on the narrow cot in the communal hall. His hand was already gripping the pistol he kept under his pillow before his conscious mind registered where he was. The metal was cool against his sweating palm. He sat there, chest heaving, listening to the frantic rhythm of his own heart. The darkness of the hall was soothing, smelling of wood smoke and dried herbs, but the phantom heat of the nightmare still prickled on his skin. He swung his legs over the edge of the cot. His right knee, the one wrapped in the heavy steel brace, ached with a deep, grinding throb. The ghost pain of the injury was always worse after the dreams. He rubbed his face with his free hand, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. Another morning, he whispered to the dark. Another day of not being dead. He couldn't go back to sleep. The adrenaline was a toxic sludge in his veins. Marcus holstered the pistol, pulled on his boots, and grabbed his coat. He needed air. He needed to see a horizon that wasn't burning. He stepped out into the pre-dawn chill of Urin Hollow. The village was silent, the wind having died down to a whisper. The massive debt hologram tower was still there, its red numbers scrolling relentlessly against the fading stars, tallying the interest accrued while the villagers slept. He wasn't the only one awake. Standing near the edge of the square, where the packed earth gave way to the jagged fields of crystalline crops, was Lyra. She was wrapped in a rough gray shawl, her silhouette stark against the lightening sky. She was watching the east, where the twin suns were just beginning to breach the horizon. The first sun, the large yellow giant, was painting the clouds in bruises of purple and gold. The second sun, the small white dwarf, was a piercing needle of brilliance chasing its brother. Marcus hesitated. He should turn back. He should leave her alone. He was an intruder in her grief, a tourist in her hell. But his feet moved him forward. The servos in his leg brace whirred softly, a mechanical insect sound in the quiet morning. Lyra did not turn, but her posture stiffened. She knew he was there. "Sleep is difficult here," she said. Her voice was flat, carrying none of the raw hysteria of the previous day. It was the voice of someone who had hollowed herself out to survive. "It is difficult everywhere," Marcus replied, stopping a few feet away. He kept his distance, respecting the invisible perimeter she had drawn around herself. She turned then, looking at him over her shoulder. In the dawn light, her bioluminescent markings were faint, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic teal light that seemed to sync with her breathing. Her eyes were dark, assessing him with a cold calculation that unsettled him. "You are leaving today," she stated. It was not a question. "That was the plan," Marcus said. "Good." The word hung in the air, sharp and final. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, about yesterday, I did not mean to overstep. You were. I was broken," Lyra finished for him. "And you put the pieces back in a pile. Do not expect me to thank you for witnessing my shame." "Soldier." The word soldier hit him like a stone. She didn't use it as a title of respect. She used it as an epithet. To her, he was just another iteration of the men who had landed the shuttle and stolen her life. "I have a name," Marcus said quietly. She turned back to the sunrise. The yellow sun was fully up now, and the heat was beginning to rise, shimmering off the rocks. "I know your kind," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You wear the uniform, or you do not. It makes no difference. You follow orders. You follow the path of least resistance. You are a hammer, and everything else is a nail. Why are you really here? Imperial intelligence? A scout for the next collection team?" "I am just a man looking for a quiet place to drink water that does not taste like engine coolant," Marcus said, a hint of his dry humor surfacing. Lyra looked at him again, and her gaze dropped to the brace on his leg, then to the heavy pistol on his hip. "Peaceful men do not carry rifles that require their own carrying cases," she said. "Stay out of my way, Marcus Hale. You may have charmed Juro, but I see the blood on you. It is brighter than the sun's." She walked past him, heading toward the fields. She didn't look back. Marcus stood there, watching her go. He should have been angry. He should have been offended. Instead, he felt a strange, hollow ache in his chest. She was right. The blood was there. He just hoped it was dry enough not to stain anyone else. The morning brought the heat, and with it, the reality of the village's desperation. Marcus had intended to pack his gear and leave. He had his water. He had his food. But as he walked back toward the communal hall, he passed the irrigation grid. It was a disaster. The grid relied on a fleet of hovering maintenance drones, bulbous, rusted machines that were supposed to mist the crystal crops with nutrient fluid. Half of them were grounded, sitting in the dust like dead beetles. The other half were sputtering, flying in erratic circles, spraying expensive nutrients onto the rocks instead of the plants. A group of villagers stood around a downed drone, arguing. They were kicking it, as if percussive maintenance would fix a fried logic board. Marcus stopped. He watched them for a moment. He looked at the debt tower. Every drop of wasted fluid was another credit added to that red number in the sky. He sighed, a long, ragged exhale that rattled in his chest. "Move over," he said. The villagers jumped, turning to look at him. Marcus dropped his duffel bag and limped over to the drone. He knelt in the dirt, ignoring the protest of his knee. "You are trying to bypass the flow regulator," Marcus said, pointing at the open panel. "That is why it is seizing. The pressure is blowing back into the intake." One of the farmers, a young man with dust in his hair, scowled. "The regulator is fused. We cannot afford a new one. You do not need a new one." Marcus grunted. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt. "You just need to trick it into thinking it is working." He went to work. His hands, scarred and large, moved with a surprising delicacy. He rewired the bypass, using a strip of conductive tape from his own kit to bridge the connection. He hummed a tuneless song under his breath, completely absorbed in the problem. For Marcus, fixing things was the opposite of his life's work. He had spent 20 years breaking things, bridges, bunkers, people, putting something back together. Making a machine hum instead of scream was the only prayer he knew how to say. "Give me that hydro spanner," he ordered, holding out a hand without looking up. The young farmer hesitated, then slapped the tool into Marcus's palm. 3 minutes later, the drone beeped, the anti-grav generators whined to life, and the machine lifted off the ground, hovering steadily at waist height. The villagers stared, then slowly. Smiles broke out on their faces. "It works!" the farmer shouted. "It works until the tape melts," Marcus said, wiping grease on his coat, "which gives you about 3 days. Do not kick it again. It has feelings." The villagers laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused to being exercised, but it was genuine. Marcus spent the rest of the day in the square. He didn't leave. He moved from machine to machine, a one-man repair crew. He fixed a water pump that had been screaming for a month. He recalibrated the solar collectors on the roof of the elder's hut. As he worked, the atmosphere in the village shifted. The fear that usually hung over Urine Hollow like a shroud began to lift, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Children, the brave scouts of any society, were the first to approach him. They gathered in a semicircle while he worked on a generator, watching his mechanical leg with wide eyes. "Is it magic?" a small boy asked, pointing a dirty finger at the brace. Marcus looked down, feigning seriousness. "No, it is a terrifying curse. If you do not eat your vegetables, your leg turns into metal and you have to oil it every Tuesday." The children giggled, covering their mouths. "Does it hurt?" a girl asked. "Only when I dance," Marcus said, winking. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a military ration bar. It was dense, tasteless, and packed with enough calories to run a soldier for 12 hours. He broke it into pieces and handed them out. "Careful," he warned. "That is guaranteed to taste exactly like cardboard mixed with sadness." The kids devoured it like it was candy. From the shadow of a doorway, Lyra watched. She had spent the morning in the fields, working until her hands blistered, trying to outrun her thoughts. She had expected the soldier to be gone when she returned. Instead, she found him holding court with a group of toddlers, explaining the aerodynamics of a rock. She watched him fix the generator. She saw the way he spoke to the villagers, not down to them, not with the arrogance of the off-worlders, but with a dry, self-deprecating wit that disarmed them. He made himself the butt of the joke so they wouldn't have to feel small. She saw him ruffle the hair of the boy who asked about his leg. The gesture was gentle, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch something innocent without breaking it. A crack appeared in Lyra's armor. It was small, a hairline fracture. But it was there. She remembered the feeling of his arms catching her yesterday, the solidness of him, the echo of his mind against hers, dark, scarred, but not malicious. She turned away, confused and angry at her own confusion. He was still a soldier. He was still part of the machine that ate children. She couldn't afford to forget that. The peace broke at 1400 hours. The sound of engines approached again. This time, it wasn't a shuttle. It was a convoy of ground skimmers, heavy repulsor lift vehicles that roared over the dunes, kicking up massive rooster tails of sand. They bore the insignia of the local imperial garrison, a jagged sunburst on a black field. Tax enforcers. The mood in the square shattered instantly. The laughter died. Parents snatched up their children. The villagers retreated toward the walls of the buildings, leaving the center of the square empty. Marcus was working on an atmospheric condenser unit near the market. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He slowly wiped his hands on a rag, stood up, and picked up his rifle case. He didn't open it. He just held it, leaning casually against the condenser. He read the tactical situation in a heartbeat. 3 skimmers, 12 men, light armor, kinetic rifles. They were bullies, not elite shock troops. They moved with the sloppy arrogance of men who were used to being feared and unused to being shot at. The lead skimmer pulled up to the elder's hut. A hatch popped open, and a captain stepped out. He was a human, thick-necked and red-faced, sweating in a uniform that was 2 sizes too tight. He carried a heavy shock whip coiled at his belt. "Elder," the captain bellowed, "the audit is incomplete. We found discrepancies in your livestock reports." Juro stepped out, bowing his head. "Captain, we have no livestock. The sandworms took the last of the herd 3 months ago." The captain laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Then you have unpaid assets. And when you have no credits and no cattle, we look for other things of value." His eyes swept the crowd. They landed on Lyra. She was standing near the well, her back stiff. She hadn't run. She refused to run. "Ah," the captain grinned, walking toward her. "The celebrity, the woman whose womb belongs to the Empire now. Tell me, alien, do you have another one baking in there? Or did we scrape you hollow?" The cruelty of the words was breathtaking. The villagers gasped. Lyra went rigid. Her skin flared, the bioluminescent markings turning a violent, burning violet. The air around her shimmered as her psionic rage began to boil over. She took a step forward, her hands curling into claws. "I will kill you," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a power that made the captain's soldiers raise their rifles nervously. "That is assault on an imperial officer," the captain shouted, uncoiling his whip. "Put her down!" Lyra raised her hand, ready to unleash a blast of raw energy that would likely get her killed. "Gentlemen," the word was spoken softly, but it cut through the tension like a razor. Marcus pushed himself off the condenser unit. He limped into the open space between Lyra and the soldiers. He moved slowly, his hands empty and visible, but his body language was terrifyingly calm. He didn't look like a mechanic anymore. He looked like a predator interrupting a meal. "Who the hell are you?" the captain demanded, his hand hovering over his holster. "Just a traveler," Marcus said, his voice mild. "But I possess a rare skill. I am excellent at doing math." "Math?" The captain blinked. Marcus nodded. He took another step, placing himself directly in the line of fire, shielding Lyra with his body. "Basic trajectory mathematics," Marcus said. "For instance, I calculate that your men are holding standard-issue kinetic rifles. Rate of fire, 600 rounds per minute. Accuracy, questionable." He looked the captain in the eye. "I also calculate that if you strike this woman, two things will happen. One, you will trigger a biopsionic backlash that will fry the electronics in your skimmers, leaving you stranded 20 miles from your base. Two." Marcus paused. He let his coat fall open slightly, revealing nothing but the handle of his pistol and the faded, scarred patch on his inner shirt. It was a black insignia, a skull with a cracked halo. The captain's eyes widened, the color drained from his flushed face. He knew that patch. Every career soldier in the sector knew that patch. The 7th Orbital Drop Shockers, the Hell Divers. A unit that had been officially disbanded for excessive brutality. A unit that was sent in when the Empire wanted a planet to stop existing. "Two," Marcus finished, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the captain's bones. "I will get bored, and you do not want to see how I entertain myself." The captain swallowed hard. He looked at his men. They hadn't seen the patch, but they saw their commander's fear. "Stand down," the captain barked, his voice cracking. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of hatred and respect. "You are a long way from the front. Hell diver." "There is no front anymore," Marcus said. "Just people trying to eat. Leave them be. Captain, the audit is finished." The captain sneered, trying to regain some dignity. "We will be back. We have orders to audit the village for more living assets next week. If I see you here, then, veteran, I will bring something bigger than a whip." "Bring a lunch," Marcus said dryly. "It will be a long day." The captain spun on his heel. "Mount up!" The soldiers scrambled back into their skimmers. The engines roared, and the convoy tore out of the square, leaving a cloud of dust and a stunned silence in their wake. Marcus let out a breath he had been holding. He turned to check on Lyra. "Are you—" He didn't finish the sentence. Lyra shoved him. It wasn't a gentle push. She slammed her palms into his chest with enough force to make him stumble back, his bad leg buckling slightly. "You bastard!" she screamed. Marcus regained his balance, holding up his hands. "Whoa! I just saved you!" "You negotiated with them!" Lyra cried, tears streaming down her face, furious and hot. "You played their game. You traded words with the monsters who stole my daughter. Why didn't you kill him? Because getting shot in the street does not help you find your baby," Marcus shouted back, his calm facade cracking. "You are one of them," Lyra accused, advancing on him. I saw the look in his eyes. He knows you. He fears you. "What did you do, soldier? How many villages did you burn before you decided to play hero in mine?" She shoved him again. Marcus grabbed her wrists. He meant to just stop her. But the moment his skin touched hers, the connection flared again. This time it wasn't just grief. It was a chaotic storm of emotions. He felt her rage, her terrifying helplessness. And beneath it, a sharp, confusing spike of attraction, a desperate need for contact, for heat, for someone strong enough to hold her broken pieces together. And she felt him. She felt the self-loathing that ate at his gut. She felt the leash he kept on his own violence. She felt the desire he had been suppressing since he saw her at dawn, a raw, protective hunger. They froze, chests heaving, standing inches apart in the dust. The air between them crackled. It was dangerous. It was the kind of tension that could lead to a kiss or a murder, and neither of them knew which one they wanted more. "Let me go," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus held on for a second longer, his thumbs brushing the pulse points of her wrists. Then he released her, stepping back. "I did burn villages," he said. His voice was rough, stripped of all humor. Lyra stared at him, rubbing her wrists. "I was on Taros 4, Marcus said, looking at the ground. "We were told it was a rebel stronghold. Strategic resources. We dropped in at midnight. We cleared the sector." He looked up, his gray eyes wet. "When the sun came up, we saw the resources. They were children, a school. The rebels had been using it as a shield, and we went through it like a fire." His voice cracked. "I saw what the Empire calls necessary collateral. I saw the math they use, and I walked away. I threw my medals in the mud and I walked until I couldn't hear the screaming anymore. But the punchline is, I still hear it. Every time I close my eyes." Silence stretched across the square. The villagers had retreated, leaving them alone in the growing shadows of the afternoon. Lyra looked at him. She saw the monster he thought he was. But she also saw the man who had stopped a massacre today with nothing but a threat. She saw the shame that lived in his marrow. She took a breath, her anger draining away, leaving her exhausted. "You did not fight today because you are afraid," she said softly. "Yes," Marcus admitted. "Afraid of them? Afraid of what happens when I start," Marcus said. Lyra looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Come," she said. "The stew is getting cold." Night fell over Urin Hollow like a heavy blanket. The wind picked up, singing through the canyon, but inside the communal hall, it was warm. They sat apart from the others, near a smaller fire. Marcus held a bowl of root stew, staring into the flames. Lyra sat opposite him, her legs tucked under her. The tension from the afternoon had dissipated, replaced by a quiet, fragile truce. "Eat," Lyra said, nudging a piece of flatbread toward him. "You look like you are made of sticks and bad decisions." Marcus snorted, picking up the bread. "Mostly bad decisions, the sticks are structural." He took a bite. It was good, earthy and hot. "So," he said, trying to bridge the silence, "you saw me fix the drone today." "I saw you hit it with a wrench and talk to it," Lyra corrected. "That is technical percussive diplomacy," Marcus said. "A very advanced technique. I once fixed a tank by insulting its mother." Lyra looked at him, one eyebrow raising. "You are lying." "I am absolutely serious," Marcus said, leaning forward, eager to see the darkness leave her eyes. "It was a hovering tank, stubborn, would not fire. I told it that it looked like a garbage scow, and the main cannon unlocked out of pure spite." He mimed the tank's reaction with his hands. Lyra stared at him. Her mouth twitched. Then she smiled. It was a reluctant thing, small and shy, but it transformed her face. The bioluminescent markings on her cheeks flared with a soft, warm pink light. For a second, she wasn't a tragic mother or a victim. She was just a woman sharing a fire with a man who was trying to make her laugh. Marcus felt that smile hit him in the chest harder than the shock whip would have. He felt a sudden, intense pull toward her vulnerability. He wanted to protect that smile. He wanted to be the reason it happened again. "You are a strange man." Marcus Hale, she said softly. I try, he said, his voice dropping. Before the moment could deepen, the heavy wooden doors of the hall creaked open. Juro entered. He looked older tonight, his face drawn and gray. He was followed by a hooded figure, a data runner smelling of burnt fuel and desperation. Juro walked straight to their fire. Lyra, Marcus, the elder said, we have news. Lyra stood up instantly, the softness vanishing. What is it? The runner brought a decrypt from the sector capital, Juro said, gesturing to the hooded figure. The runner stepped forward, pulling a data chip from his robes. I was in the lower levels of the capital spire. There are rumors, dark ones. The Empire is not just taking children for debts. They are building something. What? Marcus asked, standing up to join them. A facility, the runner said, deep underground. They call it the Echo Chamber. They are cataloging debt children, experimenting on them, trying to fuse psionic bloodlines with navigational computers. Lyra gasped, her hand going to her mouth. The runner looked at Lyra. I saw a manifest, a high-priority list. There was a genetic marker flagged, bioluminescent dermis, Class A psionic potential. Lyra grabbed the runner's cloak. Was there a name? Did it say sorry? No names, the runner said gently. Just numbers. But the description matches. Your child. She is a prime node. They are moving the subjects to the facility in 3 days. Lyra released him, spinning around. Her eyes were wild. I have to go, she said. Lyra, Juro warned, stepping forward. The capital is a fortress. It is 300 miles across the razor waste. And once you get there, it is the heart of the Empire that you cannot walk in. It is suicide. I do not care, Lyra shouted, her voice echoing in the hall. She is my daughter. They are going to cut her open and wire her to a machine. I am going. She looked at the gathered villagers. Who will help me? Silence answered her. The villagers looked down. They were farmers. They were survivors. They were not soldiers. They had families to protect here. Lyra looked at them with betrayal in her eyes. Then she turned to gather her things. Fine, she said, her voice shaking. I will go alone. She moved toward the door. Lyra. Marcus spoke. He hadn't moved from the fire. She stopped, turning back to him. Do not try to stop me, soldier. Marcus looked at her. He looked at the fire. He thought about the peace he had been looking for, the anonymity, the quiet. He thought about walking away and never looking back. Then he thought about the nightmare. He thought about the children on Taros 4. He thought about Lyra's smile and the way her hand had felt in his. He realized he was never going to find peace in running. Peace wasn't a place. It was an act. He picked up his rifle case. He picked up his duffel bag. He walked over to Lyra. He towered over her, dusty and scarred and terrified of what he was about to do. You will not make it 10 miles in the waste, Marcus said. You cannot navigate the storms. You do not know how to bypass Imperial checkpoints, and you do not know how to kill a man without hesitating. Lyra lifted her chin. I will learn. Marcus sighed. He looked at Juro. Get the crawler ready, old man, Marcus said. Lyra blinked, confused. What? Marcus looked down at her, and for the first time his eyes were clear. The gray fog was gone. I said you would not make it alone, Marcus said. He adjusted the strap of his rifle. If you go, I go. Lyra stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. The silence in the hall was absolute. Why? She whispered. Marcus shrugged, a small crooked smile touching his lips. Because I hate the Empire, he said, and I promised the kid I would dance. He nodded toward the door. Let's go get your baby. The preparations for the journey to the sector capital were chaotic, a frantic collision of desperation and logistics. Urin Hollow was not a place that bred heroes, but it was a place that understood survival. And suddenly, the village had a purpose. 3 volunteers had stepped forward to join Marcus and Lyra. They were not soldiers, but they were the best the village could offer. First was Bax, a reformed smuggler with a cybernetic eye that whirred when he was nervous. He had spent 10 years running illegal spices through the asteroid belt before retiring to farm dirt. He claimed he knew the back routes across the razor waste. Second was Rin, a teenage tech prodigy who had built the village's communication array out of scrap drone parts. She was small, twitchy, and carried a datapad like a shield. She looked at Marcus's mechanical leg with professional fascination, itching to take it apart. Third was Silas, a gruff, leather-skinned farmer who spoke little. His grandson had been taken by the debt collectors 2 years ago. He carried a heavy, rusted kinetic shotgun and a look of cold, patient fury. They worked through the morning, loading supplies onto the only vehicle capable of making the crossing, a battered cargo crawler known as the Iron Mule. It was an ugly machine, a rectangular slab of reinforced steel moving on 6 massive independent tank treads. It smelled of grease and ancient sweat, but the engine block was solid. While the team loaded water drums and energy cells, Lyra slipped away. She walked to the small circular hut at the edge of her property. It was the room she had built with her own hands during the long months of her pregnancy. The nursery. She pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, hot, and silent. A crib made of woven crystalline reeds sat in the center of the room. A mobile of polished stones hung above it, motionless in the dead air. The shelves were lined with soft clothes she had stitched by candlelight, tiny garments meant for a child who was now a number in a database hundreds of miles away. Lyra walked to the crib. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch the railing. The grief hit her like a physical blow to the stomach, doubling her over. She gripped the reeds, her knuckles white, her bioluminescent markings flaring with a sharp, jagged blue light that illuminated the dust motes dancing in the shadows. She had promised. She had promised to keep her safe. A shadow fell across the doorway. Lyra did not turn. She wiped her face quickly, trying to compose herself, trying to armor her heart again. "I am fine," she said, her voice brittle. "I am just..." Checking the inventory. Marcus stepped into the room. He moved quietly for a big man, the servos in his leg brace adjusting to the silence. He didn't speak immediately. He looked around the room, his gray eyes taking in the care, the love, and the devastating emptiness of the space. He didn't offer pity. Pity was cheap. Instead, he walked over to the shelf and picked up a small, folded blanket. It was made of soft, gray wool, embroidered with a clumsy but affectionate pattern of stars. "You should take this," Marcus said softly. Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide and wet. "Why?" "Because she will be cold when we get her out," Marcus said. "The facilities are temperature-controlled for machines, not babies. She will need something that smells like home." He held the blanket out. Lyra stared at it. She reached out, her hand shaking. As her fingers closed around the fabric, they brushed against Marcus's hand. The contact was electric. It wasn't the violent psychic shock of their first meeting, nor the angry flare of yesterday. It was a quiet, humming resonance. Lyra felt the callus on his thumb, the warmth of his blood, the steady, unshakable resolve in his mind. And Marcus felt her sorrow, but beneath it, he felt a fierce, burning hope that he had ignited. They stood there for a long moment, connected by the tiny scrap of wool, The intimacy of it was terrifying. It was easier to fight him, easier to be angry at him. Sharing this quiet, tender objective felt like stepping off a cliff. Marcus gently released the blanket, letting her pull it to her chest. "Pack it," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We leave in 10 minutes. He turned and walked out, his limp slightly more pronounced, leaving Lyra clutching the wool and breathing in the scent of a man who was trying very hard to save her. The razor waste was not a desert in the traditional sense. It was a graveyard of geology. 3 hours into the journey, the iron mule was groaning as it crested the high dunes. The landscape was a nightmare of surreal beauty. The sand here was not silica, but crushed glass and obsidian, glittering black and violet under the twin suns. Massive rock formations, twisted by ancient tectonic agony, spiraled up from the ground like petrified tornadoes. Inside the crawler, the noise was deafening. The treads ground against the glass sand, vibrating the hull. Bax drove with a relaxed slouch, chewing on a stim stick, while Silas cleaned his shotgun in the corner. Rin was curled up in the co-pilot seat, monitoring the scanners. Marcus and Lyra sat in the small cargo hold in the back, strapped into jump seats. The tension between them was palpable. Lyra was staring out the thick viewport, watching the alien landscape roll by. Strange, luminous creatures, waste runners, darted between the rocks. They were 6-legged reptilians with translucent skin that glowed with internal chemistry. Watching the crawler with hungry, intelligent eyes. "It is beautiful," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "In a we are going to die of exposure kind of way." Lyra didn't look away from the window. "It is hateful. Nothing grows here. It is just rocks and wind. It is resilient," Marcus countered. "It survives. There is something to be said for that." Lyra turned to him. "You admire survival too much. Soldier, survival is just the baseline. It is what you build on top of survival that matters." Marcus looked at his hands. "I never got around to the building part. I just got really good at the not dying part." Before Lyra could respond, the crawler lurched violently to the left. Metal shrieked as the hull groaned under a sudden impact. Bax shouted from the cockpit. "Pressure front! We have a glass storm incoming." It came out of the magnetic shadow of the ridge. Marcus unbuckled and scrambled to the cockpit, balancing against the swaying deck. He looked at the scope. A wall of white fury was racing toward them across the plains. It wasn't just wind. It was millions of razor-sharp glass particles moving at hurricane speeds. "Turn into it," Marcus ordered. "If it hits us broadside, it will flip us." "I cannot," Bax yelled, wrestling the yoke. "The tread hydraulics are overheating. We need to hunker down." "There," Rin pointed at the screen, a fissure in the canyon wall. "Coordinate 39. Get us in there," Marcus shouted. Bax slammed the throttle. The iron mule roared, its engine straining as it slewed sideways, fighting the rising wind. They crashed into the narrow fissure just as the storm hit. The sound was apocalyptic. It sounded like a million knives scratching against the hull. The crawler shook violently, lights flickering, radiation leak in the main cabin. Rin screamed, checking her data pad. "The storm is stripping the shielding on the roof. Everyone to the core," Marcus commanded. The core was a heavily shielded emergency compartment in the center of the crawler, designed to survive hull breaches. It was also tiny. Silas, Bax, and Rin scrambled into the lower access hatch, jamming themselves into the engineering crawl space. "There is no more room," Bax shouted up. "It is full." Marcus looked at Lyra. There was one other shielded spot, the maintenance locker for the reactor drive. It was a lead-lined closet, barely big enough for one person, let alone two. "In here." Marcus grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward the locker. They tumbled inside. Marcus pulling the heavy steel door shut and locking the seal just as the radiation alarm began to scream in the main cabin. The silence inside the locker was sudden and heavy, broken only by the muffled roar of the storm outside and the ragged sound of their own breathing. It was dark, lit only by a single red emergency strip on the ceiling. The space was incredibly cramped. Marcus had to stand with his back pressed against the door, his legs spread to accommodate the brace. Lyra was forced to stand between his legs, her back pressed against the reactor housing, her chest almost touching his. They were trapped. For a moment, neither of them moved. The heat from the reactor wall behind Lyra radiated through her clothes. The heat from Marcus's body radiated against her front. She was encased in warmth. "This is cozy," Marcus muttered, trying to shift his weight and failing. Lyra didn't laugh. She was hyper-aware of him. She could smell him. Gun oil, old leather, and the salt of his sweat. It was a masculine, earthy scent that cut through the sterile, recycled air of the locker. She looked up. In the red light, his face was all angles and shadows. The scar through his eyebrow looked deeper, more jagged. "You take up too much space," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I am standard military issue," Marcus replied, looking down at her. His voice was low, intimate in the tiny space. "I apologize for the inconvenience." Lyra felt a traitorous pulse of desire. It was illogical. It was dangerous. But being this close to him, feeling the solidity of his chest, the way his breath stirred the hair on her forehead, woke something in her that had been dormant since before the baby was born. She placed her hands on his chest to steady herself as the crawler shook again. Through his shirt, she could feel the heavy, slow beat of his heart. "Why did you really come?" Lyra asked, her eyes searching his. "You said it was because you hate the Empire. You said it was for the baby. But a man does not walk into a fire just out of hate." Marcus looked away, staring at the red light. "I told you," he said. "I have nothing else to do." "Liar," Lyra breathed. She pressed her hand flat against his heart. It beat faster. "You are terrified." Marcus Hale. He looked back at her. His gray eyes were unguarded for the first time. "Yes," he admitted. "I am terrified. Of dying?" "No," Marcus said. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I am terrified of this, of wanting something." Lyra went still. "What do you want?" Marcus looked at her mouth, then up to her violet eyes. "I want to believe that I can fix something," he said. "I want to believe that not everything I touch breaks. I want—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the static that made the hair on Lyra's arms stand up. She leaned in, just an inch. It was an unconscious movement, a magnetic pull. Marcus leaned down. His hand came up, hovering near her waist, hesitating, then settling there, his thumb resting on the curve of her hip. The heat of his hand burned through her tunic. Her breath hitched. She watched his eyes track the movement of her throat. "Marcus," she whispered. He was so close she could feel the warmth of his lips. He smelled like rain on hot stone. She wanted to close the gap. She wanted to bury herself in him and forget the debt, the baby, the empire, just for 1 second. The crawler shuddered violently as a massive rock impacted the hull outside. The vibration jarred them. They froze, lips inches apart, eyes locked in a sudden, terrifying clarity. They were about to kiss, in a closet, in a storm, on a suicide mission. Lyra pulled back, gasping as if surfacing from deep water. She pressed her back hard against the reactor housing, putting space between them. "We cannot," she said. her voice shaking. I cannot. Marcus pulled his hand away as if he had been burned. He pressed the back of his head against the door, closing his eyes. Right, he rasped. Right. Of course. The tension remained, thick and suffocating. They were both breathing hard, flushed and rattled. Marcus opened his eyes. He saw Lyra's distress, the way she was hugging herself. He needed to fix this. He needed to defuse the bomb he had almost set off. He cleared his throat. Well, he said, his voice straining for lightness. That is one way to pass the time, though I believe the Imperial Manual refers to this as storm-approved cuddle protocols. Very standard. Regulation 402. Lyra looked at him, startled. She blinked. Cuddle protocols? She repeated, incredulous. Marcus nodded solemnly. Essential for survival. Maintains core body temperature, prevents space madness. And it is mandatory to make it as awkward as possible. Lyra stared at him for a second. Then, a laugh bubbled up in her chest. It was a nervous, jagged sound, but it was real. You are an idiot, she said, shaking her head. I have been told, Marcus agreed, a small, relieved smile touching his lips. The laughter broke the dangerous edge of the desire, leaving behind a warmth that was safer, softer. They stood in the dark, still close, still wanting, but the panic had receded. They were partners again. The storm passed 2 hours later. The team emerged from the crawler, blinking in the harsh sunlight. The iron mule was battered, the paint stripped from the windward side, leaving it gleaming bare metal. Bax checked the engines. Intakes are clogged with glass dust, but she will run. We need an hour to clear the filters. We do not have an hour, Marcus said, scanning the horizon with a pair of electro-binoculars. The storm covered our tracks, but it also grounded us. If there were patrols. He stopped. He saw a glint of metal on the ridgeline. Not rock, refined alloy. Contact, Marcus shouted. 3 o'clock. High ridge. Before the words were fully out of his mouth, a plasma bolt slammed into the sand 10 feet from the crawler, turning the glass into molten slag. Raiders! Silas roared, racking the slide of his shotgun. 4 skimmers crested the dune. These were not Imperial military vehicles. They were scavenged, spiked monstrosities, painted in jagged ochre war paint. The men riding them were covered in rebreather masks and ragged armor. Desert raiders, likely contracted by the Empire to hunt down anyone moving toward the capital. They screamed as they descended, a terrifying, dissonant war cry. Defensive positions, Marcus ordered. Bax, get that turret online. Rin, keep your head down. Marcus dove behind a cluster of crystalline rocks, dragging Lyra with him. He snapped the latches of his rifle case, pulling out a heavy, long-barreled kinetic sniper rifle. He moved with a fluidity that belied his limp, the weapon settling into his shoulder like an extension of his body. Stay low, he told Lyra. I can fight, Lyra said, her hands glowing. Not yet, Marcus said, sighting down the scope. Wait for them to commit. The raiders opened fire. Plasma and solid slugs chewed up the ground around them. Bax returned fire with the crawler's roof-mounted heavy repeater, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the gun shaking the air. Marcus took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. 300 yards away, the driver of the lead skimmer jerked backward and slumped over the controls. The skimmer nosedived, flipping end over end and exploding in a ball of orange fire. 1 down, Marcus counted. The other 3 skimmers split up, flanking them. They were fast, moving erratically to throw off aim. They are circling, Silas shouted, firing his shotgun at a raider who got too close. The buckshot sparked harmlessly off the skimmer's armor. Lyra watched them, She felt their minds, jagged, drug-fueled, hungry. They wanted blood. They wanted loot. She felt a surge of anger. These men stood between her and Sari. One of the skimmers banked hard, coming in for a strafing run directly at their position. The gunner leaned out, a rotary cannon spinning up. Marcus was reloading. He wouldn't be fast enough. Lyra stood up. "Lyra, get down!" Marcus yelled. Lyra didn't hear him. She thrust her hands forward, palms out. She didn't know how to use a gun, but she knew how to push. She reached out with her mind, gripping the psychic signature of the oncoming driver. Stop. It wasn't a request. It was a command amplified by a mother's rage. A blast of telekinetic force erupted from her. It hit the skimmer like a physical wall. The vehicle stopped dead in midair, momentum arresting instantly. The driver flew through the windshield. The skimmer crumpled, then dropped like a stone, crashing into the sand. Marcus stared at her, stunned. That was effective, but the effort cost her. Lyra swayed, her nose bleeding. The last two skimmers converged. They had seen the display. They focused their fire on Lyra. Marcus scrambled up, abandoning his cover to tackle her, throwing them both behind the heavy tread of the crawler just as the ground where she had been standing erupted in plasma fire. He covered her body with his, shielding her from the shrapnel. Thinking of Sari, of her baby alone in the dark, Lyra lost control. The fear and the proximity to death triggered a massive, involuntary psionic pulse. It wasn't a push this time. It was a scream of the mind. A wave of violet energy exploded outward from her body. It passed through Marcus, through the crawler, through the raiders. When the wave hit Marcus, time fractured. He wasn't on the desert floor, he was in a cold, white room. He heard the humming of machines. He saw a row of transparent cribs. He zoomed in on one. Sari. He saw the baby. She was hooked up to wires, sleeping. A monitor above her head flashed a sequence of numbers. Subject 790. Psionic integration 40%. He felt the baby's heartbeat. He felt her fear. She was alive. Then, the vision snapped. Marcus gasped, slamming back into reality. He was lying on top of Lyra in the sand. The raiders were retreating, their minds scrambled by the psychic blast, their vehicles swerving uncontrollably away into the desert. Silence returned to the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of cooling plasma. Marcus rolled off Lyra, groaning. He clutched his side. His coat was torn, and blood was seeping through his fingers. A piece of shrapnel from the strafing run had caught him in the ribs. Lyra sat up, wiping the blood from her nose. She looked at him, terrified. "Marcus, I saw her." Marcus wheezed, a grin breaking through the pain on his face. "Lyra, I saw her." "What?" Lyra scrambled to him, her hands hovering over his wound. "Your blast, it linked us. I saw the lab. She is alive. She is in a white room. Sector 4. Lyra began to cry, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "She is alive?" "She is alive," Marcus confirmed. "And we are going to get her." The medbay on the Iron Mule was little more than a fold-out table and a box of supplies. Lyra cut away Marcus's shirt. The wound in his side was a jagged gash, bleeding freely but not deep enough to hit the organ. "Hold still," she said, her voice steady now. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic. Marcus hissed, his knuckles gripping the edge of the table. "Sorry," she murmured. She applied a bio-seal patch, the gel knitting the skin together. As she worked, her eyes wandered over his chest. It was a map of violence. There were circular scars from bullet wounds, jagged white lines from knives, and large, shiny patches of burn tissue from plasma fire. He was a tapestry of survival. Every mark was a time he had almost died but refused to. She finished sealing the fresh wound. Her hand lingered on his chest. She traced the line of an old scar over his heart. "You have so many," she whispered. "I am a slow learner," Marcus said, watching her face. Lyra looked at the scars. She felt an overwhelming emotion rising in her chest, not gratitude, not pity, but reverence. This body had been broken so many times, and yet here it was, placing itself between her and the fire. She felt a sudden, fierce urge to press her lips to the white scar over his heart, to kiss the pain away, to worship the resilience of him. She leaned in, her eyes dropping to his lips. Marcus went still. He didn't pull away. He watched her with a hunger that terrified him. He wanted her to do it. He wanted to be healed. Lyra's breath ghosted against his skin. Then, she stopped. The image of Sari in the white room flashed in her mind. The mission, the baby. If she crossed this line, if she let herself fall into this man, would she lose her edge? Would she become soft? She couldn't afford to be soft. Not yet. She pulled back, her hands shaking as she wiped them on a rag. "Lyra?" Marcus asked, his voice rough. "This journey," Lyra said, turning away to pack the medical kit. Her voice trembled. "It is about my child. It is not about this. It is not about you." Marcus watched her back. He saw the tension in her shoulders. He heard the lie in her voice. "I know," he said quietly. That night, the crawler was parked in the shadow of a massive obsidian spire. The others were asleep inside. Marcus stood guard outside, leaning against the treads. The twin suns were gone, replaced by 3 small, fast-moving moons. The desert was cold and silver. He smoked a stim stick, watching the smoke curl into the air. He touched the fresh bandage on his side. He thought about the compartment, the cuddle protocols, the way she had looked at his scars. He had told her he was afraid of wanting something. That had been the truth. But standing there, under the alien stars, Marcus realized it was too late. He already wanted it. He wasn't just fighting for redemption anymore. He wasn't just fighting to clear the red from his ledger. He was fighting for a future where he could wake up next to her and not have to make a joke to hide his feelings. He was fighting for a future where he could teach a little girl with blue skin how to fix a drone. He dropped the stim stick and crushed it under his boot. He looked toward the horizon, toward the capital. "Hold on, kid," he whispered to the dark. "We are coming." And for the first time in 20 years, Marcus Hale wasn't just a soldier following orders. He was a man with a reason to live. The sector capital, known as Ethelgard Prime, was not a city designed for human scale. It was a monument to the crushing weight of the imperial ego. The team left the battered iron mule hidden in a salvage yard on the outskirts, trading the safety of armor for the anonymity of the crowd. As they took the maglev train into the core, the view out the window shifted from industrial wasteland to a vertical canyon of light and noise. Towers of glass and steel pierced the smog layer, rising kilometers into the night sky. Every surface was covered in holographic advertisements. 50-foot-tall faces of beautiful, genetically perfect citizens smiled down at the streets, selling synthetic joy, debt consolidation, and loyalty to the throne. The light was relentless, neon pinks, acid greens, and blinding whites that washed out the stars and made the shadows in the alleyways seem impossibly dark. Marcus stood near the train doors, his hand resting casually on the concealed pistol beneath his coat. He watched the reflection of the city slide over Lyra's face. She was staring out the window, her expression a mask of terrified awe. To a woman from a village of mud huts and wind, this city must have looked like the throat of a god. "Keep your heads down," Marcus murmured to the group. "Rin, you have the credentials?" Rin tapped her datapad, her fingers moving in a nervous blur. Uploaded to your retinal links. According to the city grid, we are a mid-level maintenance crew from Sector 7. Do not look at the security drones. If they scan your pulse and it is too high, they will flag you. Bax, the smuggler, grunted. My pulse is always high. It is part of my charm. Just look bored, Marcus advised. Boredom is the best camouflage in the galaxy. They disembarked at the lower commercial district, a seedy layer of the city sandwiched between the sewers and the sky palaces. Here, the neon flickered, and the air smelled of ozone and frying street meat. Their contact was waiting in a club called The Static. It was a sensory assault. The music was a grinding industrial rhythm that vibrated the fillings in Marcus's teeth. The light was strobed and disjointed, designed to confuse the senses. They found the informant in a booth at the back, shielded by a privacy field. He was a balding man named Bale, wearing a stained bureaucrat's tunic. He was sweating, his eyes darting around the room like trapped birds. You brought a crowd, Bale hissed as Marcus slid into the booth opposite him. Lyra sat next to Marcus, while the others kept watch at the bar. Safety in numbers, Marcus said, his voice flat. You have the data? Bale took a drink of something blue and steaming. I have it, but the price has gone up. This is not just a ledger soldier. This is a death warrant. If they know I pulled this file, I will be disintegrated before I reach the spaceport. Marcus placed a heavy bag of credit chips on the table. It clinked solidly. Double the agreed amount, Marcus said. Now talk. Bale pulled the bag closer, checking the contents. He tapped a sequence into the table, and a holographic schematic flickered to life between them, low and dim so as not to attract attention. It showed a complex biological diagram, a human brain, mapped in red, woven together with cybernetic implants. The Debt Child program, Bale whispered, leaning in. You think they are just taking them as collateral? You think they are selling them into labor camps? No. That would be inefficient. Lyra leaned forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. What are they doing to them? Bale pointed a trembling finger at the diagram. They call them psionic amplifiers. The Empire has been struggling with deep space navigation. The slipstream destroys navigational computers. They need something organic, something that can process the chaos of hyperspace. He looked at Lyra, his eyes widening as he noticed the faint glow of her markings beneath her hood. They need biopsionics, Bale said. They are harvesting children with the active gene. They are surgically implanting neural shunts into their skulls and wiring them directly into the fleet's targeting and navigation grids. Lyra made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. They become living processors. Bale continued relentlessly. The stress burns them out in a year. Then they are discarded, and the collectors go out to find new ones. Marcus felt a cold rage settle in his stomach, a heavy, familiar weight. Who is running it? Bale swiped the hologram. A face appeared. It was a man in a high-collared black uniform, his face sharp, handsome, and terrifyingly disciplined. His eyes were cold blue and his chest was decorated with the highest honors of the Imperial fleet. Commander Valerius Rask, Bale said. He is the architect. He convinced the High Council that this was the only way to maintain superiority over the rebellion. Marcus stopped breathing. The noise of the club faded. The lights blurred. All he could see was that face. 10 years ago, that man had been his captain. Rask had been the one who taught Marcus how to hold a rifle, how to lead a squad, how to survive. Rask had been the father figure Marcus never had, the man who had pinned the medals on Marcus's chest before Marcus realized those medals were payments for atrocities. Marcus. Lyra touched his arm. He flinched, pulling away. I know him, Marcus rasped, his voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. Bale nodded. He is a genius and a monster. His headquarters are in the spire, but he is untouchable. You cannot get to him. We have to, Marcus said, staring at the hologram. Where is the facility? Under the spire, Bale said. But the security is bio-coded. You need Rask's personal retinal key to access the lower labs. Then we need to get close to Rask, Marcus said. Bale let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. Good luck. He never leaves the secure zone. Except what? Lyra demanded. Bale checked the time on his datapad. Tomorrow night, the Ascension Gala. It is a formal reception for the sector nobility. Rask is the guest of honor. He will be there, pressing flesh and securing funding for his next batch of batteries. Batteries. Lyra repeated the word, her voice turning to ice. You call them batteries. Bale shrugged, pocketing the credits. That is what they are on the ledger. Lady, Marcus stood up abruptly. The movement was violent enough to knock over the empty glasses on the table. We are done here, Marcus said. He turned and walked out of the booth, limping heavily, his fists clenched so tight the knuckles were white. Lyra followed him, casting one last look of hatred at the bureaucrat before disappearing into the crowd. They regrouped in a safe house Rin had secured, a derelict apartment in a building scheduled for demolition. It had running water and a view of a brick wall, which was more luxury than they had seen in weeks. Marcus stood by the window, staring at the distant glowing needle of the spire. He hadn't spoken since they left the club. Lyra approached him slowly. Rin, Bax, and Silas were in the other room, fabricating the necessary cover identities. He was your commanding officer, Lyra said quietly. Marcus didn't turn. He was the best soldier I ever saw. He taught me that order was the only thing standing between humanity and chaos. He told me that sometimes you have to do terrible things to keep the lights on. He laughed, a bitter, dry sound. I just didn't know the lights were powered by children. We have a way in, Lyra said, steering him away from the spiral of guilt. Rin says she can forge an invitation. Marcus turned to look at her. It is a high-security event. You cannot just walk in with a fake ID. You need a cover that screams money and arrogance. I have the arrogance, Lyra said, lifting her chin. We just need the money. Rin entered the room, holding up her datapad with a grin. I hacked the guest list. There is a minor noble house from the Outer Rim, House Vespera. They are reclusive, rich, and genetically eccentric. They sent regrets that they could not attend. They did attend, Marcus corrected, catching on. They just arrived late. Exactly. Rin said, Lyra, you are Lady Vespera, rare biopsionic lineage, very exotic, very wealthy. Marcus, you are her consort and personal guard. Me? Marcus looked down at his dusty coat and the mechanical brace. I look like a junkyard dog. Rin tossed a bundle of clothes onto the dusty couch. I spent the rest of the credit fund. Clean up, soldier. We have a ball to go to. 2 hours later, the transformation was complete. Lyra stepped out of the small bathroom. The team fell silent. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her frame like liquid water. The back was open, revealing the intricate glowing map of her bioluminescent veins. The dress was cut high on the thigh, allowing her to move, but the fabric cascaded in a way that suggested royalty. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant braid, woven with small crystals that caught the light. She didn't look like a refugee. She looked like a queen of the void. She looked at Marcus. He was standing by the door, adjusting the cuffs of a charcoal gray formal uniform. It was high-collared, tailored to hide the bulk of his muscle but emphasize the width of his shoulders. The mechanical brace on his leg had been polished and partially covered by the crisp line of his trousers, giving him a distinguished, wounded dignity rather than a ragged appearance. He had shaved. The stubble was gone, revealing the sharp line of his jaw. The scar through his eyebrow was still there, but in this context, it looked like a dueling mark, a badge of dangerous honor. He looked up as she entered. His hands froze on his cuffs. His gray eyes swept over her, taking in the light, the silk, the way she held herself. For a moment, the soldier vanished, and there was just a man, struck dumb by the sight of her. "You clean up well," Lyra said, her voice surprisingly breathless. Marcus cleared his throat, looking away to break the intensity of the moment. "The uniform is tight," he muttered. "I feel like a sausage in a silk casing." "You look like a hero," Lyra said softly. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I look like a liar. That is the job." He walked over to the table where Rin had laid out their weapons, small, concealable ceramic pistols that would bypass the metal detectors. "We need to practice," Marcus said, his voice all business. "Rask is paranoid. If he senses even a second of hesitation between us, if he thinks for a moment that we are not who we say we are, he will have security on us before we clear the foyer." "Practice what?" Lyra asked. "Intimacy," Marcus said. He turned to face her. "Lady Vespera and her consort are not strangers. They are lovers. They are bored, rich, and obsessed with each other. You have to look like you own me, and I have to look like I would burn the city down if you asked." Lyra stepped closer. "I can do that." "Show me," Marcus said. The bedroom of the safe house was dim, lit only by the streetlights filtering through the slats of the blinds. They stood in the center of the room. The air was heavy, smelling of rain and old dust. "Touch me," Marcus ordered softly. "Like you have done it 1,000 times." Lyra reached out. She placed her hand on his chest, over the lapel of his uniform. Her fingers were cool against the fabric. "Higher," Marcus corrected. "Near the neck. It is more possessive." She slid her hand up, her palm resting against the side of his neck. Her thumb brushed his jawline. The contact sent a shiver through him that had nothing to do with the mission. "Good," Marcus said, his voice rough. "Now close the distance. You are whispering a secret, or a threat. It does not matter. Just get close." Lyra stepped in. The silk of her dress rustled against his uniform. She pressed her body against his. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. She smelled of jasmine and ozone. He smelled of soap and suppressed violence. "Is this close enough?" she whispered. "Closer," Marcus said. She leaned in until their foreheads were almost touching. She could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. She could feel the heat radiating off him. "Your heart is racing, soldier," Lyra murmured. "Is that part of the cover?" "It is a tactical response." Marcus lied. "Adrenaline." He placed his hand on her waist. It was a heavy, claiming grip. He pulled her slightly tighter against him. The movement was sharp, sudden. Lyra gasped softly. "Do not flinch," Marcus warned, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "You are supposed to like it." "I am not flinching," Lyra breathed. They stood there, locked in the fake embrace. But the edges of the fiction were dissolving. The heat was real. The way their breathing synced was real. Marcus looked at her lips. They were painted a dark violet. "We might have to kiss," he said. "If he is watching." "Then we should practice that too," Lyra whispered. "To be thorough?" Marcus hesitated. He knew this was a precipice. He knew that if he did this, There was no going back to the safety of being just a bodyguard. But the gravity was too strong. He leaned down. She rose to meet him. The kiss started as a simulation. It was slow, careful, a testing of coordinates. But the moment their lips touched, the simulation crashed. It was like striking a match in a room full of oxygen. Marcus groaned, a low sound of surrender, and his hand slid from her waist to tangling in her hair. He deepened the kiss, hungry and desperate. It wasn't gentle. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving for 20 years. Lyra responded with equal force. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down. Her psionic energy flared, washing over him in waves of blue light and pure emotion, need, fear, and a burning, terrifying desire. They stumbled back, hitting the wall. Marcus pinned her there, his body shielding her, consuming her, and then he broke the kiss. He pulled back, gasping, his chest heaving. He looked at her, his eyes wide and wild. "Stop," he rasped. Lyra stared at him, her lips swollen, her eyes bright. "Why?" "Because this is not real," Marcus said, pushing himself away from the wall. "This is the mission." "You are using me," Lyra laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "Using you?" "You are scared," Marcus said, pacing the small room. "You are terrified of what we are walking into. You need an anchor. You need to feel something other than fear. So you are using me to drown it out." "How dare you?" Lyra hissed, stepping toward him. "You arrogant bastard! You think this is about fear?" "Yes," Marcus shouted, spinning around. "Because that is all I have. I am a weapon. Lyra, that is all I am. You point me at the thing you want dead, and I kill it. Do not pretend you want the man holding the gun." "You are an idiot," Lyra screamed back. She shoved him, her hands slamming against his chest. "I do not want a weapon. I want you." The words hung in the air, vibrating. Marcus froze. Lyra stood there, shaking, tears of frustration in her eyes. "I use anger as armor." "Yes," she admitted, her voice breaking. "'Cause if I stop being angry, I will collapse. But you use your guilt as a wall. You think you do not deserve to be touched. You think you do not deserve to be wanted." She stepped closer, poking him hard in the chest. "Well, that is too bad, Marcus, because I see you. I see the man who held me when I fell. I see the man who makes stupid jokes to make my people smile. I see the man who is walking into hell for a child that is not his." She grabbed the lapels of his uniform and pulled him down. "Stop fighting the wrong war," she whispered. Marcus looked at her. He saw the truth in her eyes. He saw the forgiveness he hadn't asked for, and the desire he hadn't dared to hope for. The wall crumbled. He didn't speak. He just reached for her. He swept her up, lifting her off her feet. Lyra wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in his neck. He carried her to the narrow bed in the corner. The argument was over. The role play was over. What followed was not a scene from a romance novel. It was raw and urgent. It was two people who had been broken by the world trying to fit their sharp edges together without cutting each other. Clothes were shed with frantic hands, the silk gown pooling on the floor, the formal uniform discarded. When skin touched skin, it was a revelation. Lyra's bioluminescence flared, painting Marcus's scars in soft, shifting light. He traced the patterns on her skin with reverence, his hands shaking. "Marcus." She whispered his name like a prayer. He kissed the hollow of her throat. "I am here. I am here." They moved together with a desperation that spoke of the looming deadline. They made love as if the world were ending in the morning, which, for them, it very well might. It was a collision of grief and hope, a reclaiming of their bodies from the empire that wanted to own them. For Marcus, It was a terrifying joy to be inside her, to feel her light wrapping around him, to feel her mind brushing against his with that strange, beautiful psionic echo. It was the first time in his life he felt entirely, undeniably alive. Later. The room was quiet. The streetlights outside cast long shadows across the bed. They lay tangled together under a thin sheet. Lyra's head rested on Marcus's chest. Her markings had dimmed to a contented, steady pulse, a soft blue rhythm that matched his breathing. Marcus had one arm around her, his hand idly stroking her arm. He was staring at the ceiling, his expression soft, unguarded. "You are loud," Lyra murmured, her voice sleepy. "I was not that loud," Marcus protested lazily. "Your thoughts," she said, "they are loud. You are thinking too much." Marcus tightened his hold on her. "I was thinking about tomorrow," he admitted. "Do not," Lyra said. "Not yet. I was thinking," Marcus continued, "that I have spent my whole life waiting for the bullet with my name on it. I made peace with it." He kissed the top of her head, but now, holding you. The thought of dying scares me. It scares me more than any battlefield I have ever seen. Lyra lifted her head to look at him. Her eyes were serious. "That is good," she said. "How is that good?" Marcus asked. "Fear makes you hesitate." "No," Lyra said. "Fear tells you what is important. It tells you what you have to lose." She traced the line of his jaw. "Being with you. It makes me feel dangerously hopeful, Marcus. And hope is a heavy thing to carry. But I would rather carry that than the emptiness." Marcus looked at her. He felt a surge of emotion so strong it almost hurt. He wanted to tell her he loved her. The words were there, sitting on his tongue. But before he could speak, the room was bathed in a harsh red light. Rin's data pad, which had been left on the pile of clothes, began to strobe, a priority alert. Marcus sat up instantly, the soldier snapping back into place. He grabbed the pad. "What is it?" Lyra asked, clutching the sheet to her chest. Marcus scanned the screen. His face went pale. "It is a news burst," he said grimly. "From the Imperial Network." He tapped the screen, projecting the audio. "Citizens are advised to look to the skies tomorrow at midnight. Commander Rask has announced the early activation of the stabilized psionic array. This revolutionary defense grid will ensure the security of the sector for 1,000 years. "Tomorrow?" Lyra gasped. "It was supposed to be next week." "They moved the timeline up," Marcus said, swinging his legs out of bed. He stood up, naked and unashamed, his body tense with energy. "Why?" Lyra asked, scrambling to find her clothes. "Because Rask is efficient," Marcus said, grabbing his trousers, "or because he knows there is a leak. Either way, we are out of time." He turned to Lyra. The news burst continued. "The activation ceremony will coincide with the Ascension Gala." "They are going to do it at the party," Marcus realized. "He is going to plug the children into the grid live, in front of the audience." Lyra froze. "If they activate the array with Sari connected to it, the surge will kill her. It will burn her mind out instantly." Marcus grabbed his uniform shirt. "Then we do not just have to steal a retinal key," he said, his voice cold steel. "We have to stop the broadcast." He looked at Lyra. She was standing there, holding the blue dress. Her hands were shaking. "Lyra," he said. She looked up at him. "Put on the dress," Marcus said gently. He walked over to her, cupping her face in his hands. He leaned down and kissed her. Not a practice kiss, not a desperate kiss, but a promise. "We are going to walk into that lion's den," he said, "and we are going to tear it apart." Lyra took a deep breath. Her bioluminescence flared. bright and hard. The fear vanished, replaced by the cold, diamond-hard resolve of a mother who had run out of patience. She nodded. "Zip me up, soldier." The grand atrium of the spire was suspended 2 miles above the surface of the planet, a crystalline bubble floating in the smog. Inside, the air was scrubbed clean and scented with synthetic jasmine and crushed heavy metals. 1,000 guests, the apex predators of the sector's economy, moved in a slow, glittering tide beneath chandeliers that were actually suspended gravitational fields holding shards of diamond in perfect, floating geometric patterns. Lyra stepped out of the grav lift, and for a moment, the sheer scale of the excess stopped her breath. She was used to dust, wind, and the red glare of debt. Here, the light was gold and white, soft and flattering. Marcus stepped up beside her. He offered his arm, the stiff fabric of his formal uniform brushing against her bare shoulder. "Breathe," he whispered, his lips barely moving. "You belong here. You own the room." Lyra looked up at him. The man beside her was not the dusty drifter who had fixed her generator. He was sharp, dangerous, and devastatingly handsome in the severe gray uniform. But his hand, resting on her arm, was trembling with a frequency only she could feel. "I am not afraid of them," Lyra whispered back, lifting her chin. "I am afraid of what I will do to them." "Channel it," Marcus murmured. "You are Lady Vespera. You are bored, you are rich, and you are slightly annoyed that the champagne is not chilled to your liking." They moved into the crowd. Lyra's midnight blue gown rippled around her legs, the slit high on her thigh revealing a flash of skin with every step. Her bioluminescent markings, usually a source of shame or danger in the outer rim, were here treated as high fashion. Heads turned. Eyes lingered on the glowing veins pulsing on her back and neck. Marcus played his part to perfection. He was the stoic, possessive consort, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of boredom and lethal alertness. He kept one hand on the small of her back, a touch that claimed her, steered her, and grounded her all at once. They navigated the sea of silk and jewels, accepting drinks they did not touch and nodding at conversations they did not hear. Rin's voice crackled in their earpieces, tinny and distant. "I am in the sublayer," the young tech prodigy whispered. "The security grid is tighter than a drum. I need a distraction, a big one. I need 5 minutes to loop the camera feeds in the service corridor." "Working on it," Marcus muttered into his collar. He stiffened. Lyra felt his muscles lock up under her hand. She followed his gaze. At the far end of the atrium, standing on a raised dais surrounded by sycophants and corporate warlords, was Commander Valerius Rask. He was older than the hologram Bale had shown them. His hair was silver at the temples, and his face was lined with the heavy responsibilities of empire. But the eyes were the same, cold, piercing blue. He wore a dress uniform weighed down by medals, holding a glass of wine with the casual grace of a man who held the lives of millions in the same hand. Marcus stared at him. For 20 years, he had carried the memory of Rask like a stone in his gut. Rask, who had pulled him out of the gutter. Rask, who had taught him honor. Rask, who had given the order to burn the school. The admiration and the rage collided in Marcus's chest, creating a volatile, sickening heat. He wanted to salute him, and he wanted to tear his throat out. "Marcus," Lyra said, her voice sharp. "Stay with me." Marcus blinked, the spell breaking. He looked down at Lyra. Her violet eyes were fierce, anchoring him. "He is there," Marcus said, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. "He is just a man," Lyra said, "and we are going to break him. But first, we need a scene." She scanned the room, A young, vapid duchess in iridescent feathers was staring openly at Marcus, admiring the scar on his brow. Lyra smirked. "Follow my lead," she said. She suddenly stopped walking, jerking her arm away from Marcus. The movement was sharp enough to cause the nearby guests to fall silent. "I saw you looking at her," Lyra cried out, her voice pitching up into the perfect register of a spoiled, jealous noblewoman. Marcus blinked, then caught on instantly. He stepped toward her, reaching for her hand. "My lady, you are imagining things," he said, his tone placating but patronizing. "Do not touch me," Lyra shouted, slapping his hand away. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet of the ballroom. "You think because you are pretty you can humiliate me? You think I do not know about your little dalliance on the shuttle?" The crowd gasped. The Duchess in the feathers looked delighted by the drama. Even Rask, on the dais, turned his head to watch the spectacle. "Lyra, please," Marcus hissed, playing the embarrassed lover. "You are making a scene. I will make a crater," Lyra announced, her bioluminescence flaring bright red with feigned fury. "I am going to the balcony for air. If you follow me, I will have you airlocked." She stormed off toward the terrace doors, her dress swirling dramatically. Marcus stood there for a second, looking properly chastised, then sighed loudly, gave an apologetic shrug to the surrounding nobles, and followed her. "Nice performance," Rin whispered in their ears. "Security eyes are all on the balcony. Service corridor is clear. Go!" Lyra and Marcus burst onto the balcony. The wind was high up here, whipping Lyra's hair around her face. They waited 3 seconds for the heavy glass doors to seal behind them. Then, the act dropped. Marcus moved instantly to a decorative panel in the wall, concealed behind a potted fern. He pulled a multi-tool from his cuff and pried the panel open. "You slap hard," he muttered, hacking the keypad. "Method acting," Lyra said, watching the door. "Hurry." The panel slid open, revealing a dark service lift. They squeezed inside. Marcus hit the button for the sub-basement. The descent was fast and silent. The golden light of the gala vanished, replaced by the flickering harshness of emergency LEDs. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. When the doors opened, the smell hit them first. It wasn't the smell of rot or blood. It was the smell of ozone, antiseptic, and sterile static. It was the smell of a place where life was reduced to data. They moved down the corridor, weapons drawn. The walls were lined with viewing windows. Lyra stopped at the first one. She looked inside. It was a laboratory, vast and white. Rows of machinery hummed with a low, throbbing bass note. In the center of the room, arranged in concentric circles, were transparent pods. Inside each pod was a child. There were dozens of them. Some were human, some were not. All of them were floating in a suspension gel, wires trailing from ports surgically implanted in their skulls. Their eyes were closed, but their faces were twitching in REM sleep, trapped in artificial dreams generated by the machines. Lyra let out a sound that was not quite human. It was a keen of pure, primal horror. Marcus gripped her shoulder, hard. "We have to find her." "Which section?" Lyra closed her eyes. She reached out with her mind, pushing past the terror, feeling for the specific frequency of her own blood. "Section 4, she whispered. Down the hall. They ran. They passed room after room of stolen children, the harvest of 1,000 deaths. They reached Section 4. The door was sealed. Marcus didn't bother hacking it. He placed a shaped charge on the lock, blew it, and kicked the door open before the smoke cleared. This room was smaller, high security. The pods here were reinforced. Lyra walked to the center pod. There she was. Sorry. She was so small. She had grown in the months since she had been taken. Her blue skin was pale, washed out by the harsh lights. Her tiny chest rose and fell in a shallow mechanical rhythm. A silver shunt was drilled into her temple, pulsing with a red light that matched the data scrolling on the monitor above her. "Sorry," Lyra sobbed, pressing her hands against the glass. The baby's eyes fluttered. She didn't wake up, but her tiny hand drifted toward the glass, as if she sensed the presence of her mother. Marcus stood guard at the door, his pistol raised, but he watched them. His heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. This was the resource. This was the battery. "We have to get her out," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Rin, can you cycle the unlock sequence?" "I'm trying," Rin said, her voice frantic. "But the encryption is... Wait, I didn't do that." "Do what?" Marcus asked. "The system just unlocked itself." The lights in the lab suddenly shifted from white to a menacing crimson. A siren began to wail, a low, rising tone that vibrated in the floor. The main screen on the wall flickered to life. A face appeared. It was giant, high definition, and calm. "Commander Rask." "Hello, Marcus," Rask said. Marcus lowered his weapon slightly, staring at the screen. The man looked exactly as he had at the gala, composed, holding his wine glass, but his eyes were now fixed directly on the camera. "You look good in uniform, son," Rask said pleasantly. "Better than you looked in the dirt on Orem 5. "You knew," Marcus said. "Of course I knew," Rask replied. "I have been tracking your biometric signature since you landed at the spaceport. You honestly think you can walk into my city without me knowing? I let you in, Marcus. I wanted to see if you still had the fire." He took a sip of wine. "And you do. A very impressive performance upstairs. The jealous lover, a bit cliché, but effective." "Let them go, Rask," Marcus said, stepping between the screen and Lyra. "This is over? Over?" Rask chuckled. "We are just beginning. The ascension is in 10 minutes, and you have brought me the key component." Rask's gaze shifted to Lyra, who was still clinging to the pod. "Lady Lyra of Urin Hollow," Rask said, "or should I say, Subject 790 Alpha." Lyra turned slowly to face the screen. "You stole my child." Rask shook his head. "Stole is such an ugly word. We acquired an asset. Did you never wonder, Lyra, why the debt quotas in your village were so mathematically impossible? Why the interest rates spiked only in your sector?" Lyra froze. "We ran the genetic projections 10 years ago," Rask explained calmly. "We knew there was a dormant biopsionic line in Urin Hollow. We just needed to apply enough pressure to squeeze it out. We raised the taxes to force you into default. We engineered the poverty. We needed you desperate. We needed you to fall so we could catch the prize." Lyra fell to her knees. The revelation hit her harder than the shock baton. It hadn't been bad luck. It hadn't been mismanagement. Her suffering, the hunger, the fear, it had all been a calculation, a spreadsheet designed to steal her baby. "You monster," she whispered. "Efficiency," Rask corrected. He looked back at Marcus. "But I am a reasonable man. Marcus, I know you. I know you are not a traitor. You are a soldier who lost his way. You need a mission." Rask leaned into the camera. "So here is the offer. I will open that pod. I will give the woman her baby. She can walk out of here. I will even wipe her debt." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "And what do you want?" "You," Rask said. "I need a commander for the new psionic guard. Someone who understands the cost of order. Someone who can do the hard math. You rejoin the Corps. You take command of the unit protecting this facility. You give me your loyalty, and I give you the girl." Marcus stood silent. It was the tactical play. It was the only way to guarantee Sari got out alive. They were trapped. Security was coming. If he fought, they would likely all die. If he agreed, he could save the specific life he had come to save. He hesitated. He looked at the pod. He looked at Lyra. He looked at the gun in his hand. In that silence, Lyra looked at him. She saw the calculation in his eyes. She saw the soldier weighing the variables. She saw him considering the deal. The trust that they had built in the desert, the intimacy of the bedroom, the shared breath in the storm, it shattered. "You are thinking about it," Lyra said. Her voice was dead. Marcus turned to her. "Lyra, listen. We are surrounded. If I say yes, she lives." "You are thinking about it," Lyra screamed, scrambling to her feet. "I am trying to save her," Marcus shouted back. "By joining them? By becoming the jailer for the rest of them?" Lyra pointed at the other pods, the hundreds of other children. "You would trade them all for her? You would become him?" Marcus looked at the screen, then back to Lyra. "I do not know how else to get you out." "Then you are exactly what I said you were," Lyra spat, stepping back from him. "A soldier. You follow orders. You follow the path of least resistance." She looked at him with a heartbreak that was absolute. "I do not need a soldier. Marcus, I need a father. And you are not him." Lyra turned to the control panel of the pod. "Lyra, what are you doing?" Marcus asked, stepping forward. "Get away from me," Lyra yelled. She placed her hands on the console. She didn't try to hack it. She didn't try to use Rin's code. She closed her eyes and screamed, pouring every ounce of her fear, her rage, and her love into a psychic lance. She didn't target the lock. She targeted the power core of the wing. Break. The air in the room distorted. A shockwave of violet light exploded from her body. The consoles sparked and exploded. The lights blew out, plunging the room into darkness before the red emergency strobes kicked in. The hum of the machinery turned into a screeching whine. "Warning," a computerized voice blared. "Critical system failure. Containment fields destabilizing. Reactor purge imminent." On the screen, Rask's image flickered. He looked annoyed, disappointing. Rask said, "Kill them." The screen went black. The heavy doors at the end of the corridor hissed open. A squad of Imperial elite security troops, armored in white plastoid, marched in. Their weapons were raised. Lyra slumped against the pod, blood running from her nose. The feedback had been massive. She had fried the locks. The pods were hissing open, but she had also triggered a meltdown. The children began to wake up. Hundreds of confused, terrified minds suddenly unplugged from the matrix, screaming in unison. The psychic noise was deafening. Marcus stood in the chaos, and the alarms were screaming. The soldiers were advancing. Lyra was broken on the floor. He looked at the soldiers. He looked at Rask's blank screen. The hesitation was gone. The moment he saw Lyra's face crumble, the moment he realized she thought he was going to betray her. Something in him snapped. He didn't want to be a soldier. He didn't want to be a commander. He reached up and tore the earpiece out. He walked over to the wall comms unit, smashed the glass, and keyed the all-channel broadcast. "Rask!" Marcus roared into the mic, his voice amplified throughout the entire facility, booming over the gala upstairs, echoing in the streets. "You want an answer? Here is your answer." Marcus turned and raised his pistol. He didn't fire at the soldiers. He fired at the coolant tanks lining the ceiling. Liquid nitrogen sprayed out in a freezing fog, filling the corridor, blinding the advancing troops. "I am not your son," Marcus shouted into the comms. "And I am not your soldier. I am the man who is going to burn this place to the ground." He dropped the mic and turned to Lyra. He grabbed her, pulling her up. "Lyra! Look at me. Lyra pushed at him weakly. Go away, go join your master. Marcus grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. I am here. I am with you. I rejected him. Do you hear me? I rejected him. Lyra blinked, seeing the fire in his eyes. We are getting her out, Marcus said, his voice fierce. We are getting them all out. But I need you to hold it together. Can you stabilize them? Lyra looked at the pods. The children were screaming, their minds raw and unshielded. If the psionic feedback loop continued, their brains would liquefy. I cannot. It is too much. You can, Marcus said, pressing his forehead against hers. You are the strongest thing I have ever seen. Do it. I will handle the rest. He spun around, racking the slide of his pistol. He pulled the sniper rifle case off his back, kicking it open. The security team breached the fog. Laser fire zipped past them, scorching the walls. Marcus Hale didn't flinch. He stepped into the line of fire. He moved with the brutal, efficient grace of the hell diver he used to be. But this time, he wasn't fighting for the Empire. He fired, double-tapping the lead guard. He threw a flash grenade, blinding the second wave. Hold the line! Marcus shouted over the roar of the guns. Behind him, Lyra took a breath. She reached into the pod and pulled Sari into her arms. The baby was crying, a thin, wailing sound. Lyra clutched her daughter to her chest. She felt the beat of her heart. She closed her eyes. She reached out with her mind, not to break, but to hold. She cast a net of psychic comfort over the room, wrapping the minds of the screaming children in a blanket of soft, blue light. Hush, she projected. We are here. You are safe. The screaming in the room died down to a whimper. Marcus reloaded, ejecting a spent clip. He glanced back at her. He saw her glowing like a beacon in the smoke, holding her child, holding the minds of 100 others. I love you, he shouted over the noise of the battle, firing a burst at the doorway. Lyra's eyes snapped open. She looked at his broad back, at the way he stood between her and the darkness. I know, she screamed back, tears streaming down her face. Now shoot them! The reactor alarm screamed louder. The facility began to shake. Let's move, Marcus yelled. They ran into the smoke, carrying the future in their arms, leaving the wreckage of the Empire's order burning behind them. The spire was dying. It was a slow, agonizing death of metal and glass, orchestrated by the screaming of 1,000 alarms that harmonized into a dissonance vibrating in the teeth and bones of everyone inside. Red emergency strobes cut through the thickening smoke, turning the pristine white corridors into a strobe-lit nightmare of confusion and panic. The facility was not just burning, it was screaming. The structural integrity alarms had harmonized with the reactor containment warnings to create a dissonance that vibrated in the teeth and bones of everyone inside the spire. Red emergency strobes cut through the thickening smoke, turning the corridors into a strobe-lit nightmare of confusion and panic. Above them, the automated PA system, its voice calm and terrifyingly polite, announced the end of the world. Alert! Terrorist sabotage detected in Sector 4, containment protocols active. All non-essential personnel proceed to the upper hangars. This is not a drill. Marcus Hale heard the lie before he even processed the sound. Terrorist sabotage. They were already spinning the narrative. They were already preparing to bury the truth under a mountain of propaganda and rubble. He shoved a fresh magazine into his pistol, the motion crisp and violent. Rin! Marcus shouted into his headset, his voice barely cutting over the roar of a collapsing bulkhead. Tell me you are still on the line. Rin's voice came back, strained and breathless. I am here. I am in the sublayer vents. Marcus, they are scrubbing the data. I can see the purge algorithms eating the files. They are trying to erase the kids from the database before the system goes down. Stop them, Marcus ordered. I cannot stop the purge and broadcast the signal at the same time, Rin yelled back. I need access to the central command override. It is in the high tower. Marcus looked up. Through a shattered viewport, he could see the upper levels of the spire, still gleaming in the night, untouched by the fire raging below. That was where Rask would be, not running, not hiding. He would be watching the destruction of his life's work with a glass of wine in his hand, calculating the acceptable losses. I am going up, Marcus said. Lyra gripped his arm. Her face was pale, streaked with soot and sweat. She was cradling Sari against her chest with one arm, while her other hand was pressed against her temple, glowing with a fierce, strained violet light. Around her, a dozen freed children huddled, their eyes wide and vacant, their minds still raw from the disconnection. You cannot go alone, Lyra gasped. He will kill you, he will try, Marcus said grimly. He looked at the children. You have to get them to the lower hangar. Bax and Silas are bringing the mule around to the freight elevator. Lyra shook her head. The corridors are swarming with drones. I can feel them. They are in hunter-killer mode. You can handle them, Marcus said, gripping her shoulder. You are not just a mother anymore. Lyra, you are an army. I am tired, Marcus, she whispered, her voice cracking. I am so tired. Marcus leaned in, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the fire. He pressed his lips to her forehead. I know, but you have to hold on, just for 10 more minutes. Get them to the hangar. Do not stop for anything. He pulled back, his gray eyes locking onto hers. I will meet you there. He didn't wait for her to argue. He turned and sprinted toward the service lift, his mechanical leg pounding a heavy rhythm on the deck plates. Lyra watched him go. Then she turned to the children. She felt their terror washing over her like a tidal wave. She tightened her grip on Sari, feeling the small, steady heartbeat against her own. Stay close to me, she told the children, her voice finding a steel core. And do not look at the shadows. The control chamber at the top of the spire was an island of silence above the inferno. The walls were made of polarizing glass, offering a 360-degree view of the burning city below. Commander Valerius Rask stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He was watching the smoke billow from the lower levels. He looked like a captain watching a storm he had predicted but could not prevent. The heavy blast doors hissed open behind him. Rask didn't turn. You are late, Marcus, he said calmly. Marcus walked into the room. He didn't raise his weapon. He kept it low at his side. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline burning in his veins. It is over. Rask, Marcus said. The facility is breached. The children are out. Rask turned slowly. He took a sip of his wine, his blue eyes cold and unbothered. A setback. Rask admitted. Expensive, certainly, but not fatal. The Empire is vast. Marcus, do you think this was the only facility? Do you think we put all our eggs in one basket? Marcus froze. What? Rask smiled, a thin, cruel expression. We have 3 other sites coming online in the Outer Rim next month. This was just the prototype, the proof of concept. And thanks to the data we harvested from Subject 790 Alpha, the new arrays will be stable. We learned what we needed to learn. He gestured to the burning city below. Sacrifice. Marcus, it is the fuel of civilization. Order requires payment. You know this. You wore the uniform. Marcus stepped forward, his knuckles white on the grip of his pistol. That is not order, Marcus spat. Turning babies into circuit boards is not order. It is madness. It is fear dressed up in a dress uniform. You are terrified of losing control, so you consume the future to keep the present alive for one more day. Rask set his glass down on a console. The sharp clink echoed in the room. "And what is your alternative?" Rask asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone. "Chaos? Anarchy? Look at the galaxy. Marcus, look at the rebellion. They burn worlds in the name of freedom. We offer stability. We offer a universe where the trains run on time and the borders are secure. If the price of that safety is a few thousand children from debt-ridden backwaters, then I will pay it, and I will sleep soundly." Marcus raised his gun. "Then you are going to sleep for a long time," Marcus said. Rask moved. For an older man, he was terrifyingly fast. He didn't go for a weapon. He tapped a command on his wrist link. Gravity in the room shifted. Marcus was slammed to the floor as the localized gravity field spiked to 3 Gs. His mechanical brace groaned, the servos whining in protest. His pistol skittered across the polished floor. Rask walked toward him, moving effortlessly. He was wearing a gravity-dampening belt. "You always lacked vision." "Marcus," Rask said, drawing a ceremonial vibro blade from his belt. The blade hummed with a lethal high-frequency pitch. "You see the blood on the floor. I see the architecture of peace." He kicked Marcus in the ribs. The impact, magnified by the gravity, felt like being hit by a truck. Marcus gasped, tasting blood. Rask stood over him, the blade poised. "I offered you a place at the table," Rask said. "Now you are just debris." He thrust the blade down. Marcus rolled. The blade sparked against the floor tile, inches from his throat. Marcus grabbed Rask's wrist. The gravity was crushing him, pinning him down. But Marcus Hale had spent his life carrying weights that should have killed him. He roared, a guttural sound of pure defiance, and twisted Rask's arm. Rask grunted, surprised by the strength. Marcus used the leverage to sweep Rask's legs. They went down together. The gravity field didn't care who was who anymore. They were 2 men grappling in a crushing invisible ocean. Marcus slammed his forehead into Rask's nose. Bone crunched, Rask shouted, dropping the blade. Marcus scrambled on top of him. He grabbed Rask's collar and slammed him into the console. His hand found the gravity controls and smashed them. The pressure lifted instantly. Both men gasped, air rushing back into their lungs. Marcus was faster. He drew a combat knife from his boot and pinned Rask to the console, the blade pressing against the commander's jugular. "Do it!" Rask wheezed, blood streaming from his nose. "Make me a martyr. The Empire will build a statue of me on the ashes of your village." Marcus stared at him. He saw the fanaticism in Rask's eyes. He saw the absolute certainty that he was right. Killing him wouldn't destroy that. Killing him would just validate it. "No," Marcus whispered. "No statues." He reached for the console, grabbing the broadcast microphone. He keyed it open. "Rin!" Marcus shouted. "Patch me into the emergency channel. Override the local jammers. I am trying." Rin's voice came through. "I need a clearance code." Marcus looked at Rask. He grabbed Rask's hand and forced it onto the biometric scanner. Rask struggled. "You fool! You cannot stop the signal. I am not stopping it." Marcus growled. "I am aiming it." The console chirped. "Access granted. Clearance level, Commander Tsinuoyun." "We are live," Marcus said. He shoved the microphone into Rask's bloody face. "Tell them," Marcus ordered. Rask spat blood. "I will tell them nothing." Marcus pressed the knife harder against Rask's throat, drawing a thin line of red. "Tell them about the expansion," Marcus hissed. "Tell them about the 3 other worlds. Tell them how you chose Urin Hollow. Tell them the math. Valerius, you are so proud of the math. Let the galaxy check your work." Rask stared into the camera lens. He saw the red light blinking. He knew, in that moment, That silence was surrender. If he spoke, he could twist it. He could explain it. He could make them understand the necessity. We did what was necessary, Rask began, his voice rasping over the speakers. The Debt Child Initiative, it is a vital security measure. We selected subjects based on genetic viability. Keep going, Marcus growled. The village of Urine Hollow, Rask continued, his ego taking the bait, believing he could justify the horror. It was a targeted extraction. The economic pressure was applied to force the release of the asset. The alien woman's baby was taken as payment for debts because the debt was the only lever strong enough to break the mother's resistance. He looked into the camera, his eyes burning with conviction. We did it to save you. We did it to secure the borders. It is a small price. Marcus pulled the microphone away. That is enough, Marcus said. He slammed Rask's head into the console, knocking him unconscious. Marcus looked at the camera. You heard him? Marcus said to the silent, listening galaxy. It was not terrorism. It was a business transaction. And we are closing the account. 500 feet below. Lyra was fighting a different war. The lower corridors were a maze of collapsing durasteel and fire. The air was thick with toxic smoke. Lyra moved at the center of a tight circle of children. She was exhausted. Her biopsionic energy was flickering, her markings dimming to a faint, sickly gray. Every 50 feet, a security drone would drop from the ceiling vents. They were spider-like machines, armed with pacifier darts and shock webs. Lyra didn't shoot them. She didn't have a gun. She broke them with her mind. A drone dropped in front of them, its red eye swiveling towards Sari. No! Lyra lashed out, a whip crack of telekinetic force that shattered the drone's optical sensor. The machine spasmed and collapsed. Lyra stumbled, falling against the wall. Blood trickled from her ear. Using her power this much, this fast, was tearing her neural pathways apart. Mama, a small boy whispered, tugging on her dress. The roof is singing. Lyra looked up. The support beams were groaning, bending under the heat. Move! Lyra shouted, pushing the children forward. They scrambled into the main freight hangar. It was cavernous, filled with smoke. At the far end, she could see the Iron Mule and a stolen Imperial shuttle, their engines idling. Bax was at the ramp of the shuttle, firing his blaster at a squad of stormtroopers, pinning them down. Get to the ship, Bax roared. Lyra herded the children toward the ramp. Laser fire zipped past them. One bolt singed the hem of her dress. She was almost there. 10 feet. Then, the ceiling gave way. A massive section of the catwalk above detached, falling in slow motion amidst a shower of sparks. It was falling directly onto the last group of children, 3 small ones who had lagged behind. Lyra didn't think. She turned back. She threw herself over the children, curling her body into a shield, clutching Sari to her chest. She raised one hand, trying to summon a telekinetic barrier, but she had nothing left. The well was dry. She closed her eyes, waiting for the crush. It didn't come. A shadow fell over her. A heavy impact shook the floor, but it wasn't the metal hitting her. She opened her eyes. Marcus was there. He was kneeling over her, his back arched, holding the massive slab of falling durasteel up with his shoulders and his mechanical leg. The servos in his brace were screaming, whining at a pitch that sounded like dying animals. His face was purple with strain, veins bulging in his neck. Move, Marcus roared, his voice a strangled rasp. He was holding up 2 tons of debris. It was impossible. It was the act of a machine or a madman. Lyra scrambled out from under him, dragging the children with her. Marcus, go! Marcus yelled. He shoved the debris aside with a final explosive burst of strength, collapsing to the floor as the metal crashed down where they had been seconds ago. He rolled, gasping, clutching his knee. The brace was smoking, the metal warped. Lyra dropped Sari into Bax's arms at the ramp and ran back. She grabbed Marcus, hauling him up. "You idiot," she sobbed, half dragging him toward the shuttle. "You beautiful idiot, I told you." Marcus wheezed, limping heavily, his arm draped over her shoulders. "I promised the kid I would dance." They stumbled up the ramp as Bax laid down a final suppression volley. "Punch it," Marcus yelled at the cockpit. The shuttle's engines flared blue-white. It lurched into the air, tearing through the smoke, blasting out of the hangar bay just as the facility's reactor went critical. Behind them, the spire vanished. It didn't fall. It dissolved in a blinding sphere of white light. The explosion bloomed like a synthetic flower, erasing the labs, the records, the cages, and the man who believed he could budget the cost of a soul. Marcus and Lyra watched the screen from the cargo hold. They were covered in soot, blood, and dust. They were holding hands so tightly their fingers were turning white. "It is gone," Lyra whispered. Marcus nodded, leaning his head back against the bulkhead. "It is gone," he said. The galaxy did not stay silent. Rask's confession, broadcast on every frequency from the core to the rim, did exactly what he feared it would do. It didn't bring understanding. It brought rage. The image of the decorated commander admitting that an alien woman's baby was taken as payment for debts became the spark that lit 1,000 fires. It was too specific, too cruel, too undeniable. It stripped away the abstract language of security and collateral and revealed the ugly human cost. Riots broke out on 50 worlds. The Imperial Senate, terrified of a total collapse, convened an emergency session. Before the sun set on Ethelgard Prime, the Debt Child program was suspended. The surviving children were placed under the protection of the Interstellar Red Cross, and far away, on a planet that the maps had almost forgotten, a shuttle landed in the dust. Epilogue. 6 months later, the wind in Urin Hollow still hissed through the crystalline crops. But the sound was different now. It didn't sound like hunger. It sounded like music. The Debt hologram tower was dark. It stood in the center of the village like a rusted skeleton, a monument to a dead era. Vines of glowing creepers had begun to climb its legs, reclaiming the metal for the earth. The village was alive with activity. New moisture evaporators, built with clean tech imported from the core, hummed quietly. The market stalls were full. There were no drones overhead, only the native birds gliding on the thermals. In the communal square, a group of children were playing. They were a mix of species, human, reptilian, and blue-skinned like Lyra. They were the sanctuary children, the ones who had nowhere else to go, brought here to heal. Marcus sat on a bench in the shade, watching them. He looked different. The military coat was gone, replaced by a simple tunic and work trousers. The mechanical brace on his leg was new, a sleek custom job built by Rin, who had set up a workshop in the old drone hangar. He was cleaning a hydro spanner, his hands moving with the slow, relaxed rhythm of a man who had nowhere to be. A shadow fell over him. Lyra. She was radiant. Her bioluminescence was bright and steady, a soft teal that pulsed with contentment. She was holding Sari, who was now a chubby, giggling toddler with eyes that held the whole galaxy. "You are slacking off, soldier," Lyra said, smiling. "I am supervising," Marcus corrected, setting the tool down. "It is a vital command function." He reached out and Sari lunged for him. He took the baby, settling her onto his knee. She immediately reached for his face, her tiny fingers grabbing his stubble. "Ow," Marcus said, feigning great pain. Lyra, your daughter is assaulting a veteran. This is a violation of the treaty. Sari giggled, a sound like silver bells, and pulled harder. Lyra laughed, sitting down beside him. She leaned her head on his shoulder. How are the nightmares? She asked softly. Marcus paused. He looked at the baby in his arms. He looked at the dead tower. Fading, he said. I haven't heard the screaming in weeks. That is good, Lyra said. She laced her fingers through his. They sat there for a moment in the comfortable silence of two people who had seen the end of the world and decided to build a new one. Across the square, a commotion drew their attention. A transport had landed earlier that morning, an off-world news crew. They were setting up cameras, interviewing the villagers. They wanted the story. They wanted the legend. The reporter, a young woman with a frantic energy, was talking to Juro. The elder looked ancient and dignified, leaning on his staff. But how did it happen? The reporter asked, holding her microphone out. How did a farming village bring down a sector commander? Juro looked at the camera. He looked across the square at Marcus and Lyra. He smiled, a slow, knowing expression. He cleared his throat. The alien woman's baby was taken as payment for debts, Juro said, his voice carrying the weight of history. That is where it started. It was a tragedy like 1,000 others. He paused, letting the silence hang in the hot noon air, until a veteran arrived in the village at noon. The reporter blinked, and then, Juro said, gesturing to the free children playing in the dirt, to the dark tower, to the couple sitting on the bench. And then, the math changed. Marcus heard the words. He looked at Lyra. She was looking at him. Her violet eyes were wet, but she was smiling. We changed the math, she whispered. Marcus shifted Sari to one arm and wrapped his other arm around Lyra, pulling her close. He kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of jasmine and dust. Yeah, Marcus said, watching the twin suns hang perfectly balanced in the sky. We did. He looked at the dead tower one last time, then turned his back on it, focusing on the heavy, warm weight of the child in his arms and the woman who had brought him back to life. The story was over. The life was just beginning.